She stood in the rain with a child's blood on her hands, and the whole town watched her fall. They'd whispered about Eliza Moore since the day she arrived, the woman with secrets, the stranger who didn't belong. But when little Lucy Hale ran into that storm and the stable beam came down, Eliza didn't think. She just moved. Now as she knelt in the mud cradling the rancher's daughter, she knew this moment would define everything. The job was supposed to be simple: cook, stay quiet, disappear. Instead, she'd become the one thing she swore she'd never be again: someone who mattered. If you want to see how a woman rebuilt her life from ashes and became a mother to a child who chose her first, stay until the end. And hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach jerked to a stop in a cloud of dust that seemed to hang in the air like a question mark. Eliza Moore pressed her palm against the window, feeling the glass warm beneath her touch despite the autumn chill that had settled over the western frontier. Through the grime-streaked pane, she could see Dry Creek for the first time. A scatter of wooden buildings huddled together as if seeking protection from the vast emptiness surrounding them. It wasn't much. A general store with a sagging porch. A saloon with doors that swung in the wind. A church with a bell tower that leaned slightly to the left, as though even God himself was uncertain about this place. The street was more dirt than road, rutted with wagon tracks and littered with the evidence of hard living. A few people moved about their business with the kind of weariness that spoke of long winters and longer disappointments. Perfect, Eliza thought, gathering her single carpet bag and the leather satchel that held everything she owned in this world. Perfect because no one would look too closely at a stranger here. Perfect because people who chose to live this far from civilization usually had their own reasons for staying invisible. She'd become an expert at disappearing. 3 towns in 2 years. Each one smaller and more remote than the last. Each one farther from Boston, from the accusations, from the trial that had ended her old life as surely as a door slammed shut. The jury had acquitted her, barely, but the verdict hadn't mattered to people who'd already decided she was guilty. A woman alone, they'd whispered. A woman who'd worked in that house, who'd been present when Mrs. Ashford's jewelry went missing, who couldn't prove her innocence beyond the shadow of doubt that clung to her like smoke. "End of the line, miss." The driver's voice startled her from her thoughts. He was already climbing down, moving to unlatch the door, with the efficiency of a man who'd made this journey 1,000 times before. Eliza stepped out into the afternoon sun, squinting against the brightness. The air here tasted different, dry and sharp, carrying the scent of sage and something else she couldn't quite name. Distance, maybe. The smell of being far enough away that the past couldn't follow. "You'll be wanting the hotel?" The driver gestured toward a 2-story building that proclaimed itself the Dry Creek Hotel in faded lettering. "Or are you meeting someone?" "The Hale Ranch," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady and unremarkable. "I'm the new cook." The driver's eyebrows rose slightly, the first real expression she'd seen on his weathered face. "Hale Ranch. That's a good 6 miles north. You'll need to hire a wagon." "I can walk." "Not with that bag, you can't, and not before sundown. You'll want to—" "I'll manage." Eliza pulled a coin from her pocket and pressed it into his hand before he could argue further. She'd learned that people stopped asking questions when you acted like you knew exactly what you were doing, even when you didn't, especially when you didn't. She started walking north, following the direction the driver had pointed. The main street gave way to scattered homesteads, then to open grassland that rolled toward distant hills. The bag grew heavier with each step, but Eliza didn't slow down. She'd walked farther before, with less purpose. At least this time, she had a destination, a job, a chance to disappear into usefulness until she could figure out her next move. The advertisement had been brief, almost curt. Cook needed. Remote ranch. Room and board. Must be reliable and discreet. Apply, Nathan Hale, Dry Creek. She'd answered by telegram, received an equally brief response with a start date and directions. No questions about her experience, no requests for references. Just a job offered to someone who'd been desperate enough to answer. The sun was lower now, painting the landscape in shades of amber and gold. Eliza's feet ached and a blister had formed on her left heel, but she could see buildings in the distance. A barn, large and solid. A house with a peaked roof. Corrals and outbuildings scattered across a property that spoke of more prosperity than she'd expected. The Hale Ranch wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in a way that seemed almost defiant in this harsh country. She approached slowly, taking in details. The barn had been recently painted, the red still bright and clean. The fences were well maintained, the wood strong and straight. Cattle grazed in the near pasture, healthy animals with thick coats already growing in for winter. Someone was taking care of this place, someone who had standards. The thought made her nervous. She'd grown accustomed to employers who were too busy or too indifferent to look closely at the help they hired. Standards meant scrutiny, and scrutiny meant questions she couldn't answer. The front door of the main house opened before she reached it. A man stepped out onto the porch, tall and lean with shoulders that spoke of hard work and harder winters. He wore dark trousers and a shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, and his face had the kind of stillness that came from being more comfortable with silence than with words. "You're late." His voice matched his appearance, low, rough, economical, with everything including inflection. "I'm exactly on time." Eliza set down her bag, meeting his gaze directly. She'd learned that looking away made people think you had something to hide. "The telegram said to arrive by sundown on the 16th. The sun hasn't set." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or the ghost of amusement. It was gone too quickly to be sure. "You walked from town." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I did." "Why?" "I chose to." They stood looking at each other, and Eliza felt the weight of his assessment. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, maybe less. The lines around his eyes came from squinting into sun and wind, not age. His hair was dark, touched with just enough gray at the temples to suggest he'd earned every year he carried. His hands, hanging loose at his sides, were scarred and strong and told stories she couldn't read. "Nathan Hale," he said finally. "Eliza Moore." He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "You have experience cooking for ranch hands?" "I have experience cooking for people who work hard and expect decent food." She kept her voice level, professional. "I can make substantial meals from whatever's available. I don't waste, and I don't complain about the hours." "Good, because the hours start at 4 in the morning and end when the work's done. You'll cook 3 meals a day for myself, my daughter, and 4 ranch hands. More during roundup or branding. You'll manage the kitchen supplies, make a weekly list of what's needed, and keep everything clean. You'll have Sundays off after breakfast until evening chores." "Understood." "Wages are $15 a month plus room and board. You'll have a room off the kitchen, door locks from the inside. The men know to keep their distance, but if any of them gives you trouble, you tell me immediately." Eliza nodded, oddly touched by this last detail. He'd said it matter-of-factly, without drama, but the message was clear. She would be protected here. It had been a long time since anyone had offered her that kind of safety. One more thing. Nathan's expression hardened slightly, his jaw setting in a way that made him look carved from the same granite as the distant mountains. "I don't tolerate gossip. Don't talk about my business to the hands. Don't carry tales to town. And don't ask questions that aren't your concern. You're here to cook, that's all. That's all I want to do." And she meant it. Simplicity was safety. Anonymity was survival. He studied her for another long moment, and Eliza had the uncomfortable feeling that he saw more than she wanted to show. But finally he stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door. "Come inside. I'll show you your quarters." The house was bigger inside than it appeared from the outside, built with the kind of solid craftsmanship that spoke of permanence and care. The front room held sturdy furniture arranged without fuss, a sofa that showed signs of use, chairs positioned near a large stone fireplace, a desk in the corner stacked with papers and ledgers. Everything was clean but utilitarian, functional rather than decorative. It was also eerily quiet. Eliza had worked in homes before, big ones and small ones, loud ones and lonely ones. This house felt like the latter, as though the silence wasn't just an absence of sound, but a presence in itself, filling every corner and settling over everything like dust. "Kitchen's through here." Nathan led her through a doorway into a large room that smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. It was well equipped, a cast iron stove that looked almost new, a sturdy work table in the center, shelves lined with dishes and pots and supplies. A window over the sink looked out toward the barn, and another door led to what appeared to be a pantry. Your room. He opened a door in the far wall, revealing a small but tidy space. A bed with a thick quilt, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin. A small window with curtains that someone had sewn with more skill than artistry. The door had a bolt on the inside, just as he'd promised. It was more than she'd expected. More than she'd had in some time. "Thank you," she said quietly. Nathan nodded, already turning away. "Get settled. Dinner's at 6. I usually make something simple for myself and Lucy, but now that you're here, we'll expect a proper meal. Supplies are in the pantry. Use what you need." "Lucy?" "My daughter." He paused, his back still to her. "She's 6. She'll likely come investigate once she realizes you're here. She's curious about everything." There was something in his voice when he spoke of his daughter, a softening, a warmth that transformed him from stone into something more human. It lasted only a moment before he was moving again, his boots heavy on the wooden floor as he headed toward the front door. "Mr. Hale?" Eliza called after him. He stopped, half turning. "Nathan, we don't stand on formality here." "Where's Lucy now?" "Upstairs, napping." He hesitated, then added, "Her mother died 2 years ago. Fever. Lucy doesn't remember her well, which is probably for the best. She can be shy with strangers. Don't take it personally." Before Eliza could respond, he was gone, the front door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the quiet house. She stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the silence reshape itself around her, and wondered what exactly she'd walked into. A simple cooking job, she reminded herself. That's all this was. She'd stay long enough to save some money, long enough for the whispers to die down completely back east, and then she'd move on again. She always moved on. It was safer that way. Eliza unpacked quickly, hanging her 3 dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her few possessions on the dresser. A brush and mirror. A book of poetry she'd carried from Boston, its pages soft with handling. A locket she never wore but couldn't abandon, holding a photograph of parents she barely remembered. Everything she owned fit into a space no larger than a merchant's display case. "This is enough," she told herself. "This is safe." The pantry proved to be well stocked. Flour and cornmeal, dried beans and rice, canned vegetables and fruit, slabs of salted pork hanging from hooks. Someone had been managing the supplies competently, probably Nathan himself. She found fresh eggs in a crock, a tin of coffee, a jar of honey. Enough to make a respectable meal for tonight, and to begin planning for tomorrow. She was pulling out ingredients, already composing a menu in her head, when she felt it, the prickle of awareness that came from being watched. Eliza turned slowly, casually, and saw the little girl standing in the kitchen doorway. Lucy Hale was small for 6, delicate in the way of children who'd been sick or sad or both. She wore a simple cotton dress, slightly faded, and her dark hair hung in braids that were coming loose. She had her father's eyes, that same deep brown that seemed to see more than it should, but her face still held the roundness of childhood, the softness that hadn't yet been carved away by hardship. She stared at Eliza without speaking, one hand gripping the doorframe as if she might bolt at any moment. "Hello," Eliza said gently, keeping her voice low and unthreatening. She'd learned that children responded better to calm than to enthusiasm. "You must be Lucy." The girl nodded but didn't come closer. "I'm Eliza. I'm going to be cooking here." She turned back to the counter, giving the child space to decide what to do next. "I was just thinking about what to make for dinner. Do you like biscuits?" Another nod, barely perceptible. "Good. I make excellent biscuits. My mother taught me when I was about your age. The secret is not to handle the dough too much. You want to mix it just until it comes together, then pat it out gently." She was measuring flour as she spoke, falling into the familiar rhythm of preparation. "Do you help your father in the kitchen sometimes?" "Sometimes." The voice was so quiet, Eliza almost missed it. "I can set the table." "That would be very helpful. Thank you." Lucy didn't move immediately. She stood in the doorway, watching Eliza's hands as they worked, cutting cold butter into the flour, adding buttermilk, bringing the dough together with practiced efficiency. It was only when Eliza began patting out the dough that the girl took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was standing at the edge of the work table. "You can come closer if you like," Eliza said, not looking up. "I don't mind company while I work." Lucy crept forward until she could see over the edge of the table. Her eyes were wide, tracking every movement. "You're pretty," she said suddenly. Eliza blinked, surprised into a smile. "Thank you. So are you. My mama was pretty too. Papa has a picture of her upstairs." Lucy's voice was matter-of-fact, but something flickered across her face, not quite sadness, more like the memory of an emotion she'd learned to carry. "I don't remember her much, just pieces. I'm sorry." Eliza cut the biscuits with a water glass, working in smooth, efficient movements. "It must be hard, not having her here. Papa says she's watching from heaven, but I don't feel watched." Lucy tilted her head, considering. "Do you think people can really watch us from heaven? Because if they can, that seems like it would be very boring for them. All they'd do is watch all day." Despite everything, despite the long journey, the aching feet, the weight of starting over again, Eliza laughed. It surprised her, the sound foreign in her own ears. "That's a very practical way of looking at it. Papa says I think too much." But Lucy was smiling now, a small, shy curve of her lips. "Can I help with something? Do you know how to snap beans?" "Yes." Liza retrieved a basket of green beans from the pantry and set it on the table within Lucy's reach. "Snap off both ends and break them in half. Put them in this bowl." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the snap of beans and the crackle of the fire in the stove. Through the window, Eliza could see Nathan in the distance, working with a horse in one of the corrals. He moved with the kind of grace that came from years of practice, his body and the animals communicating in a language she couldn't understand. "Do you have any children?" Lucy asked suddenly. "No." "Do you want children?" Eliza paused, her hand still on a biscuit cutter. It was such an innocent question, asked with a child's directness, but it cut deeper than Lucy could know. "I haven't thought about it much," she said finally, which was both true and false. She'd stopped letting herself think about futures that included such things. Futures required staying, and staying meant risk. "I want a brother or sister," Lucy announced. "But Papa says it's just us now, and that's enough. I think he's sad, though. He gets quiet sometimes and stares at nothing." Children saw too much. Eliza had forgotten that, or maybe she'd never really known it. She'd been raised by people who thought children were miniature adults, expected to behave accordingly, their observations dismissed as childish fancy. But Lucy's quiet comment revealed a depth of perception that made Eliza's chest tighten with something uncomfortably close to sympathy. "Sometimes people need quiet," she said gently. "It doesn't always mean they're sad. Sometimes it just means they're thinking." "What do you think Papa thinks about?" "I couldn't say, but I imagine running a ranch this size requires quite a lot of thinking." Lucy considered this, her small hands still working through the beans with surprising efficiency. "I think he thinks about Mama, and about being alone, and about whether he's doing things right." She looked up suddenly, her dark eyes serious beyond her years. "Do you think he's doing things right?" Eliza felt the full weight of that gaze, the hunger behind it. This child wasn't just making conversation. She was searching for something. Reassurance, maybe, or permission to believe that her small, motherless world was acceptable. "I think," Eliza said carefully, "that your father is doing the best he knows how, and I think you're very loved." Lucy's face transformed, a smile breaking through like sun after rain. "I am," she said with certainty. "Papa tells me every night before bed, even when he's tired, even when he's been working all day and his hands hurt. He always says, 'Lucy girl, you're the best thing in my whole world.'" Something cracked in Eliza's chest, a fissure in the armor she'd built so carefully. She turned away quickly, busying herself with sliding the biscuits into the oven. That's very nice. Do you say prayers before bed?" "Sometimes." "Never, actually. Not anymore. Not since the trial, when she'd prayed so hard for justice and received only the cold comfort of a verdict that changed nothing. Papa and I say prayers together. You can pray with us if you want." Lucy hopped down from her stool, the bowl of prepared beans held carefully in both hands. "Should I put these anywhere special?" "Just on the counter is fine. Thank you for your help." "You're welcome." The girl set down the bowl and then, with startling boldness, reached out and took Eliza's hand. Her fingers were small and warm and slightly sticky from the beans. "I'm glad you're here," she said earnestly. "It's been lonely with just Papa and me and the ranch hands. The ranch hands are nice, but they don't talk much, and Papa doesn't talk much either. You talk just the right amount." Eliza looked down at the small hand in hers and felt something shift inside her, something dangerous and terrifying. This was how it started. The caring, the attachment, the forgetting that she was supposed to stay separate and safe. This was how you got hurt. She should pull away, should maintain distance, should remember that she was only passing through, that involvement meant vulnerability, that this child and her quiet father were not her concern beyond fulfilling the terms of her employment. Instead, she gently squeezed Lucy's hand. "I'm glad I'm here too," she said, and meant it more than she wanted to. The dinner that evening was the first meal the three of them shared, and it set the pattern for all the meals that would follow. Eliza served biscuits golden and steaming, beans cooked with onions and salt pork, fried potatoes crisp at the edges, and a dried apple pie she'd managed to pull together from pantry supplies. It was simple, hearty food, but she'd made it with care, and it showed. Nathan ate methodically, without comment, but she noticed he took seconds of everything. Lucy chattered happily, her earlier shyness evaporated, telling her father about helping with the beans and asking questions about the horses, and reporting that Miss Eliza made excellent biscuits, just like she'd promised. "Thank you for the meal," Nathan said when he finished, pushing back his chair. "It was good." 2 sentences. Eliza had received more effusive praise for far lesser efforts, but somehow these plain words, delivered without flourish, felt more genuine than any flowery compliment. "You're welcome. I'll be in the barn for another hour or so. Lucy needs to be in bed by 8. I'll handle it." He was already moving toward the door, pausing only to ruffle his daughter's hair as he passed. "Finish your pie, Lucy girl, then wash up for bed." "Yes, Papa." And then he was gone, leaving Eliza alone with the child and the quiet house and the unsettling sense that she'd just witnessed something carefully maintained, a routine, a structure, a way of being that kept everything manageable and safe. Nathan Hale was a man who controlled what he could control, and grief wasn't on that list, so he controlled everything else instead. She understood that better than she wanted to admit. "Miss Eliza?" Lucy was looking at her with those 2 perceptive eyes. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" "Yes, I'll be here every day. That's my job." "Good." The girl took another bite of pie, swinging her legs under the chair. "I was afraid you might be like the other ones." Eliza stilled. "Other ones?" "The other cooks. We've had 3 since Mama died. They all left. Papa said it was because they didn't like being so far from town, but I think it was because we're too sad. Our sadness made them uncomfortable." She said it simply, without self-pity, as if reporting a fact about the weather. "Oh, sweetheart." The endearment slipped out before Eliza could stop it. "That's not... People leave jobs for all sorts of reasons." "But 3 people, all for different reasons?" Lucy shook her head, suddenly looking far older than 6. "I'm not stupid, Miss Eliza. I know we're different now. Papa doesn't smile like he used to. I heard Mrs. Patterson from town tell her friend that this house is touched by sorrow, whatever that means. And people look at us funny sometimes, like they feel sorry for us but don't want to get too close, like sadness might be catching." Eliza had to look away, had to focus on clearing the table because the alternative was gathering this child into her arms and promising things she had no right to promise. "Sadness isn't catching," she said firmly, "and there's nothing wrong with this house or with you or with your father. People can be thoughtless. That's their failing, not yours." "Is that why you came here? Because you don't mind sadness?" The question was so direct, so disarmingly innocent in its ruthlessness, that Eliza nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "I came here because I needed work," she said carefully. "And because I'm good at cooking, that's all." Lucy studied her for a long moment, then nodded, as if accepting this explanation despite clearly not quite believing it. "Well, I'm glad anyway. You feel different than the others. You feel like you might stay." "But I won't," Eliza thought. "I can't. I never stay." She didn't say it out loud, though. She'd just finished clearing the table and washing the dishes while Lucy sat at the kitchen table, drawing pictures on a slate with chalk, humming tunelessly to herself. And when Nathan returned from the barn and scooped his daughter up to carry her upstairs for bed, Eliza retreated to her small room and closed the door and reminded herself of all the reasons why staying was impossible. In the morning, she woke at 4 just as the sky was beginning to soften from black to gray. The house was silent, but she could hear movement outside, boots on gravel, the low rumble of men's voices, the sounds of a ranch coming to life. She dressed quickly in the dark and made her way to the kitchen, lighting lamps as she went. The ranch hands arrived at 5:30, bringing cold morning air and the smell of horses with them. There were 4 of them, as Nathan had said, tough, weathered men with few words and careful manners. They nodded to her respectfully, called her ma'am, and ate the breakfast she'd prepared, hotcakes and bacon and eggs and coffee strong enough to strip paint, with the focused intensity of men who knew they had a long day ahead. Nathan ate with them, sitting at the head of the table, discussing the day's work in clipped sentences, mending fence in the north pasture, moving cattle to higher ground, checking the hay stores in the far barn. He ran his ranch with the same efficiency he seemed to apply to everything else: waste nothing, expect competence, solve problems before they became crises. Lucy appeared as the men were finishing, still in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Nathan's entire demeanor changed when he saw her, his face softening, his voice gentling. "Morning, Lucy girl. Why are you up so early?" "I wanted to see Miss Eliza." She climbed into the chair beside her father and accepted the plate of hotcakes Eliza set before her. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Eliza poured coffee for the men, topped off Nathan's cup, set out more bacon. She was aware of them watching her, not overtly, not rudely, but with the assessment of men who'd been disappointed before and were reserving judgment. She didn't mind. She'd been assessed before. She knew how to prove herself through action rather than words. The days fell into a pattern after that. Wake before dawn. Feed the men. Clean the kitchen. Prepare lunch. Feed everyone again. Clean. Prepare dinner. Feed. Clean. In between, there were pies to bake, and bread to knead, and supplies to inventory, and 1,000 small tasks that kept a household running. It was hard work, physical work that left her tired at the end of each day, but it was also satisfying in a way her previous positions hadn't been. Here, she wasn't serving people who took service for granted or who watched her with suspicion. Here, she was simply doing necessary work that was appreciated, if not effusively praised. The ranch hands always thanked her. Nathan acknowledged every meal with a quiet "good" or "thank you." And Lucy bloomed under the simple attention of having another woman in the house. The child began appearing in the kitchen more often, helping with small tasks, asking endless questions, filling the quiet spaces with her bright, curious presence. She showed Eliza her collection of smooth stones from the creek. She reported on the progress of a bird's nest in the barn. She drew pictures of the ranch, the house, the barn, the horses, and always, in the center, 3 stick figures labeled Papa, me, and Miss Eliza. "Should I add the ranch hands?" Lucy asked one afternoon, showing Eliza her latest creation. "If you'd like." Eliza was peeling potatoes, the rhythmic motion almost meditative. "I don't think I will. They're nice, but they're not family. Family is different." She looked up suddenly, her expression serious. "You feel like family, Miss Eliza. Do you feel like we're family?" "Careful. Be careful. I work for your father, sweetheart. I'm here to cook. But you could be more than that." Lucy's voice was wistful, longing for something she couldn't quite articulate. "You could be." She didn't finish the sentence, but Eliza heard the unspoken word anyway. Mother. You could be mother. And that was when Eliza realized the danger she was in. Not from Nathan, whose careful distance kept everything professional and contained, not from the work, which she could manage easily, but from this small, lonely child who was starting to weave dreams around a woman who would inevitably disappoint her. That evening, after Lucy had gone to bed, Eliza found Nathan in the barn, checking on a horse that had seemed lame earlier. He looked up as she approached, surprise flickering across his face. She so rarely sought him out, keeping to her domain in the kitchen while he moved through his world of animals and land. "Is something wrong?" he asked, straightening. "No, nothing's wrong. I just—" She paused, gathering her thoughts. This was harder than she'd expected. "I wanted to talk to you about Lucy." His expression shuddered immediately, his entire body going still with a wariness she recognized, a father protecting what mattered most. "What about her?" "She's getting attached to me, and I think you should know that I'm not planning to stay permanently. This is a good position, and I'm grateful for it, but I'll likely move on eventually. Maybe in a few months, maybe next year. I don't want her to get too attached to someone who's going to leave." Nathan was quiet for so long that Eliza started to wonder if he was going to respond at all. He turned back to the horse, running his hand down its leg, checking for heat or swelling with experienced fingers. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "Lucy gets attached easily. It's her nature. She wants to love everyone and everything. He paused, his jaw working. "She wants a mother. I know that. I see it every day, but I can't give her that. I'm not going to marry again. I won't." There was something raw in those last words, something that spoke of wounds that hadn't healed and might never heal. Eliza understood that too. Some losses carved so deep that the idea of replacement felt like betrayal. "I understand," she said quietly. "I just thought you should know so you can prepare her, or explain things, or whatever you think is best." Nathan straightened, turning to face her fully. In the dim light of the barn, with shadows pooling in the hollows beneath his cheekbones, he looked older than his years, tired, carrying weight that no one else could see. "I appreciate you telling me," he said. "But here's the thing, Miss Moore. Lucy needs what you're giving her, even if it's temporary. She needs to see a woman who's competent and kind. She needs to learn how to cook and clean and manage a household from someone who knows what they're doing. She needs—" He trailed off, then started again. "She needs normal. She needs to see that life goes on, that not everyone leaves through death, that sometimes people leave because they choose to, because they have their own lives to live, and that's acceptable. That's healthy even." "You want her to learn how to let go?" "I want her to learn that caring about people doesn't always end in devastation." His voice was rough now, emotion breaking through the careful control. "I want her to know that it's okay to let people in, even if they don't stay forever, that love doesn't require permanence to be real." Eliza stared at him, struck by the complexity of what he was saying, the careful philosophy he'd constructed around his daughter's grief. He wasn't trying to protect Lucy from loss. He was trying to teach her how to survive it. That's very wise," she said finally. "It's survival." Nathan turned away, back to the horse, ending the conversation with the same quiet finality he brought to everything else. "Thank you for telling me, but don't pull away from her on my account. She'll be fine. We'll both be fine." Eliza left the barn feeling oddly unbalanced, as if the conversation had shifted something she couldn't quite name. She'd expected him to ask her to stay longer, or to keep more distance, or to do something that would make her position clearer. Instead, he'd given her permission to care temporarily, to invest without promising forever, to be present without pretending permanence. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her chest ache with a loneliness she usually kept locked away. The weeks passed, and autumn deepened into something more serious. The first frost came, silvering the grass and painting patterns on the windows. The cattle were moved to winter pastures. The ranch hands built up wood piles and repaired barns and prepared for the cold months ahead. Through it all, Eliza cooked stews and roasts and pies, biscuits and cornbread, and thick soups that warmed from the inside out. Lucy remained her constant companion in the kitchen, growing more confident, more open, more comfortable with each passing day. She told Eliza about her mother in fragments, a smell she remembered, a song, the feeling of being held. She talked about her father with a mixture of love and concern, this tiny girl trying to take care of a man too proud to admit he needed taking care of. "Papa works too hard," Lucy announced one afternoon while helping Eliza roll out pie crust. "Mrs. Patterson says he's going to work himself to death, but I told her that was a silly thing to say. You can't die from working, can you?" People need rest, Eliza said carefully, not wanting to alarm the girl but also not willing to lie. Your father is very strong, but even strong people need to take care of themselves. He doesn't sleep well. I hear him walking around at night sometimes, moving through the house like a ghost. Lucy pressed her small hands into the dough, mimicking Eliza's movements. Do you think he's sad? I think he probably misses your mother very much. Do you think he'll ever be happy again? Really happy, not just pretend happy for me? The question pierced Eliza's heart. She set down her rolling pin and knelt beside Lucy, bringing herself to the girl's eye level. I think, she said slowly, that happiness doesn't look the same for everyone. Your father seems content with his work and with you. That might be his kind of happiness right now. And that's okay. Lucy studied her face with those two wise eyes. What about you, Miss Eliza? Are you happy? The automatic reassurance died on her lips. She'd never been asked that question so directly, with such genuine curiosity. I'm content, she said finally. Like your father. I have work I'm good at and a place to sleep and food to eat. That's more than many people have. But is it enough? Lucy persisted. Don't you want more? Don't you want... She didn't finish, but Eliza knew what she was asking. Don't you want a home? Don't you want family? Don't you want to belong? Sometimes, Eliza admitted, the truth slipping out despite her better judgment. What we want and what we can have are different things. And that's okay too. We do our best with what we have. Lucy frowned, clearly dissatisfied with this answer, but before she could press further, Nathan appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the space in that quiet way he had. Lucy, can you go check on the chickens? Make sure they have fresh water? But I'm helping Miss Eliza us. Now, please. There was no harshness in his tone, but something in it made Lucy's eyes widen. She nodded quickly, wiping her floury hands on her apron, and slipped past her father without argument. Eliza stood, suddenly nervous. Had he heard their conversation? Was she overstepping again, saying too much, getting too close to the child? I need to talk to you, Nathan said, and his face was grim in a way that made her stomach tighten with dread. Of course. What is it? He stepped fully into the kitchen, and she could see now that he was holding something, a letter, the paper worn from handling. I received this today, from town. He paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. There's been talk. About you. About why you came here. The world tilted sideways. No. Not here. Not yet. She'd been so careful, so quiet, so unremarkable. How had they found her? What kind of talk? Her voice came out steady despite the panic rising in her throat. That you left your last position under a cloud. That there were accusations. Theft. He was watching her carefully, and she could see him trying to read her response, trying to determine truth from lie. Is it true? This was it. The moment where everything ended, where she would have to pack her single bag and move on again. Always running, never safe. She could lie. Had lied before in other towns to other employers. But something in Nathan's face stopped her. Maybe it was the directness of his gaze. Maybe it was the memory of Lucy's small hand in hers, the trust that had been freely given. Maybe she was just tired of running. I was accused, she said quietly. My employer lost some valuable jewelry, and suspicion fell on me because I was the newest member of the household staff. I was tried and acquitted. The jury found insufficient evidence to convict, but people... She swallowed hard. People decided I was guilty anyway. The verdict didn't matter to them. I became unemployable in Boston, and then in every town I tried after that. Someone always heard, someone always spread the story. Did you do it? Direct. No dancing around the question. No. She met his eyes without flinching. I swear to you, I didn't take anything, but I can't prove my innocence any more than they could prove my guilt. That's the problem with accusations. They stain you whether they're true or not. Nathan was silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she held his gaze, let him see whatever he needed to see. She'd learned that people would believe what they wanted to believe, regardless of evidence or protestations. If he'd already decided she was guilty, nothing she said would change his mind. My wife died 2 years ago, he said finally, his voice rough. Childbirth fever. Came on fast. One day she was fine, the next she was burning up. And within 3 days she was gone. The doctor couldn't do anything. I couldn't do anything. I watched her slip away and He stopped, his jaw working. I held her while she died, and the last thing she said to me was, "Take care of our girl." Not herself. Not about the pain or the fear, or just Lucy. Always Lucy. Eliza didn't know what this had to do with her situation, but she sensed he needed to say it, needed her to understand something. After she died, Nathan continued, people in town looked at me with pity. They brought food and offered help and said all the right things. But underneath it all, there was judgment. Questions about whether I'd done enough, whether I'd called the doctor soon enough, whether I'd somehow failed her. One woman even suggested that my working so much, being away from the house so often, had somehow contributed. As if grief could be measured in hours spent at home. He looked at Eliza directly now, and she saw pain in his eyes, old and deep and still raw. I learned something then. People need someone to blame when terrible things happen. They need a reason, an explanation, a villain. It makes them feel safer, like if they just avoid whatever caused the tragedy, they'll be protected. So they create stories, assign guilt, pass judgment. It has nothing to do with truth. It's about managing their own fear. "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered, "about your wife, about what people said. I'm telling you this because I understand what it's like to be judged for something you couldn't control, and because I want you to know that I believe you." He set the letter down on the kitchen table, his movements deliberate. "I've watched you with Lucy. I've watched you work. You're not a thief. I'd stake my ranch on it." The relief that washed through Eliza was so intense it left her shaking. She gripped the edge of the counter, fighting sudden tears. "Thank you," she managed. You don't know what that means." "But," Nathan continued, and her heart sank again, "you need to know that this will likely get worse before it gets better. Mrs. Patterson, the woman who wrote me, is the biggest gossip in 3 counties. If she knows, everyone knows. They'll talk, they'll judge, and some of them will expect me to fire you." "Will you?" The question came out smaller than she intended. "No." Simple. Certain. "But I wanted you to be prepared. Town's going to be harder now. They'll watch you. They'll wait for you to make a mistake, any mistake, so they can say they were right about you all along." Eliza nodded. The familiar weight of being watched, being judged, settling back onto her shoulders. She'd carried it before. She could carry it again. "I understand. There's one more thing." Nathan's expression shifted, becoming almost awkward. "Lucy doesn't know about any of this. She just knows you as Miss Eliza, who makes good biscuits and lets her help in the kitchen. I'd like to keep it that way. Children don't need to know about the ugly parts of adult life." "Of course, I wouldn't—" She stopped, struck suddenly by the full weight of what he was doing. He wasn't just choosing to keep her employed. He was actively protecting her from gossip, sheltering her from judgment, defending her to a community that had known him his entire life. "Why are you doing this? Why risk your reputation for someone you barely know?" He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a depth of feeling she hadn't heard from him before. "Because everyone deserves a chance to prove who they really are, separate from what people say about them. And because—" He paused, then continued more quietly. "Because Lucy is happier now than she's been in 2 years. This house is warmer. It feels less empty. That's worth fighting for." Before Eliza could respond, before she could even process what he'd said, he was moving toward the door, that same efficient motion that seemed to be his default whenever emotion got too close. "I'll speak to Patterson. Make it clear that you have my full support. It won't stop the talk, but it might limit it." "Nathan," she called after him. He stopped, half-turned. "Thank you for believing me." He nodded once, then was gone, leaving Eliza alone in the kitchen with flour on her hands and tears on her face and a feeling in her chest that was equal parts gratitude and terror. Because she'd told herself this was temporary. She'd promised herself she wouldn't care, wouldn't attach, wouldn't let herself believe in this fragile sense of belonging. But it was already too late. She'd crossed a line somewhere between Lucy's sticky-fingered trust and Nathan's unexpected defense. She'd started to hope. And hope, she'd learned, was the most dangerous thing of all. The gossip arrived in Dry Creek like a winter wind, cold, cutting, and impossible to ignore. Within days of Nathan's warning, Eliza felt the change every time she ventured beyond the ranch boundaries. The general store owner who'd been cordial now watched her with narrowed eyes as she selected supplies. Women who'd nodded politely before now turned away, their skirts rustling with disapproval. Even the stagecoach driver, who'd helped her down with her bags that first day, now barely grunted acknowledgement when she collected packages. Mrs. Patterson herself made a point of crossing the street when she saw Eliza coming, her face pinched with righteous satisfaction. She'd done her work well, Eliza thought bitterly. The story had spread like wildfire through Dry Grass, embellished, no doubt, with each retelling. By now she'd probably graduated from mere theft to grand larceny, from suspicion to confirmed guilt, from one employer's jewelry to multiple households robbed blind. The truth never mattered as much as a good story. But if the town had turned cold, the ranch remained warm. Nathan kept his word, making it clear to anyone who asked, and several who didn't, that Miss Moore had his complete confidence and that any insult to her was an insult to him. The ranch hands, taking their cue from their employer, maintained their respectful distance and polite manners. And Lucy, blessedly ignorant of the adult drama swirling around them, continued to fill the kitchen with her bright presence and endless questions. "Miss Eliza, why do some people look mean when we go to town?" Lucy asked one morning, helping to shell peas at the kitchen table. It had been 3 weeks since the letter arrived, and the child's perceptiveness had finally caught up with the situation. Eliza's hand stilled over the bowl. "What makes you think people look mean?" "Mrs. Patterson made a face at you last week, like she smelled something bad. And Mrs. Chen from the laundry wouldn't talk to you when you brought the washing. She just took it and closed the door really fast." Lucy's small fingers worked efficiently through the pods, years of helping in the kitchen evident in her practiced movements. "Did you do something wrong?" Here it was. The conversation Eliza had been dreading. She could lie, could deflect, could change the subject. But Lucy deserved better than that. Children always knew when adults were being dishonest, even if they couldn't articulate how they knew. "Some people think I did something wrong," Eliza said carefully. "A long time ago, before I came here, I was accused of taking something that didn't belong to me. I didn't do it, but some people believe I did anyway." Lucy's eyes went wide. "But if you didn't do it, why do they think you did?" "Sometimes people believe what they want to believe, even when there's no proof. It makes them feel safer to have someone to blame when bad things happen." "That's not fair." Lucy's voice carried the outrage only children could muster at injustice. "Papa says you're supposed to tell the truth and believe people unless they give you a reason not to. Those people are breaking Papa's rule." Despite everything, Eliza smiled. "Your Papa is a wise man." "I know." Lucy returned to her peas with renewed vigor, her small face set in determined lines. "And I don't care what Mrs. Patterson thinks. She's mean anyway. She told Papa he should remarry, and when he said no, she said he was being selfish, keeping me out here without a proper mother. Papa told her to mind her own business, and she got all huffy. I was glad." Eliza absorbed this information, trying to imagine Nathan, quiet, controlled Nathan, telling the formidable Mrs. Patterson to mind her own business. The image should have been amusing, but instead it made her chest tighten with something complicated. He'd defended his choices about his daughter to a woman who'd known him since childhood. He'd drawn a line and dared anyone to cross it. "He did the same thing for you," a voice whispered in her mind. "He chose you over their approval." "Your Papa loves you very much," Eliza said softly. "Everything he does is to protect you and give you a good life." "I know that too." Lucy set aside the finished peas and looked up with those dark eyes that saw too much. "But I think he's lonely. And I think you're lonely too. Maybe you could be lonely together, and then neither of you would be lonely anymore." The statement was so direct, so innocently hopeful, that Eliza didn't know how to respond. She was saved from having to try by the sound of boots on the porch and Nathan's voice calling for Lucy. "Papa!" The girl scrambled down from her chair and ran to meet him, leaving Eliza alone with the peas and her tangled thoughts. Nathan appeared in the doorway a moment later, Lucy perched on his hip despite being almost too big for such carrying. His hat was pushed back, revealing hair dampened with sweat, and his shirt was dusty from whatever work he'd been doing. He looked tired, but content, his face softening in that way it only did around his daughter. "We're riding into the north pasture to check the fence line," he told Eliza. "We'll be back by dinner." "I'll have something ready." He nodded, already turning to go, but Lucy called out, "Miss Eliza was telling me about mean people in town who think she did something bad, but she didn't really do it." Nathan froze. His eyes met Eliza's over his daughter's head, a question in them. "She noticed the change in people's behavior," Eliza explained quietly. "She asked. I gave her an honest answer." Something flickered across Nathan's face. Surprise, maybe, or approval. "Lucy girl, do you remember what I told you about judging people? That you shouldn't do it unless you know the whole story. And even then, you should be kind because everyone makes mistakes." "That's right." He set her down gently, kneeling to bring himself to her eye level. "Miss Eliza didn't make any mistakes. Sometimes people are wrong about others. It doesn't mean the person being judged did anything bad. It just means the people judging need to learn to be better. So we're being better by keeping Miss Eliza here. Yes, we're doing what we know is right, regardless of what others think." Lucy nodded solemnly, then threw her arms around her father's neck. "I'm glad we're the kind of people who do what's right." "Me too, Lucy girl, me too." Watching them together, this quiet man and his earnest daughter, Eliza felt something crack deeper in her chest. She'd spent 2 years building walls, keeping herself separate, refusing to care too much about the places she landed. But these two had slipped past her defenses without even trying. They'd offered her something she'd stopped believing existed. Acceptance without condition, trust without proof, a place at a table that felt dangerously close to home. After they left, Eliza threw herself into work with renewed intensity. She scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing, reorganized cupboards that were already organized, baked enough bread for a week. Physical labor kept her mind from dwelling on dangerous thoughts, from imagining futures that couldn't exist, from hoping for things that always ended in disappointment. She was pulling a roast from the oven when she heard the horses returning, earlier than expected. Through the window, she could see Nathan riding in fast, Lucy in front of him in the saddle, and even from a distance, Eliza could tell something was wrong. She was out the door before they'd fully stopped, her heart hammering. "What happened?" "She's fine," Nathan said quickly, but his face was tight with an emotion Eliza couldn't quite read. "Just spooked. We had a close call with a rattlesnake." Lucy was pale but dry-eyed, clinging to her father's shirt with white-knuckled fists. "It was so loud, Miss Eliza. The rattle, I mean. Papa said don't move, but I wanted to run, but he held me still, and then he shot it with his pistol, and it was so loud and—" "Shh, sweetheart. You're safe now." Eliza reached up to take the girl as Nathan carefully handed her down. Lucy immediately wrapped her arms around Eliza's neck, burying her face against her shoulder. "She did good," Nathan said, dismounting. "Stayed calm when it counted. But the adrenaline's hitting her now." Eliza could feel Lucy trembling, the delayed fear catching up with her small body. "Come inside. I'll make some tea with honey." In the kitchen, she settled Lucy at the table and set about making the promised tea, her hands moving automatically through the familiar motions. Nathan stood in the doorway, watching them, and when Eliza glanced up, she caught an expression on his face that made her breath catch, something raw and unguarded, there and gone in an instant. "The snake was close?" she asked, keeping her voice steady for Lucy's sake. "Too close. 3 feet, maybe less." Lucy almost stepped on it. His voice was carefully controlled, but Eliza could hear the fear beneath it, the knowledge of how badly things could have gone. "I've told her 100 times to watch where she's walking, but she was chattering about something and not paying attention." "I'm sorry, Papa," Lucy whispered. "I'll be more careful." "I know you will, Lucy girl." Nathan moved into the room, crouching beside his daughter's chair. "You did everything right once you realized the danger. That's what matters." They stayed like that for a moment, father and daughter, heads bent together, and Eliza turned away to give them privacy, busying herself with the tea. But she couldn't shake the image of what might have happened, how close this small family had come to another tragedy, how fragile safety really was. "Miss Eliza?" Lucy's voice was small, uncertain. Yes, sweetheart? Will you stay with me tonight until I fall asleep? I keep seeing the snake in my head. Eliza looked at Nathan, seeking permission. He nodded once, his face grateful. Of course I will. Later, after dinner had been served and cleaned up, after Lucy had been bathed and dressed for bed, Eliza found herself sitting beside the girl's narrow bed in a room she'd never entered before. It was small and neat, filled with the treasures of childhood. A worn doll, a collection of pretty rocks on the windowsill, drawings tacked to the walls. On the nightstand was a photograph in a simple frame, a young woman with kind eyes and Lucy's same dark hair, holding a baby. Lucy's mother, Sarah, the woman whose loss still echoed through this house. That's Mama, Lucy said, following Eliza's gaze. I don't remember her face very well anymore, but Papa says I have her smile. Do you think I do? Eliza studied the photograph, then looked at Lucy. I think you do, especially when you're happy. Papa says she loved to sing, and that she made up stories about everything, why the sky was blue, where the wind came from, why birds flew south in winter. He says she could make magic out of ordinary things. Lucy's voice was wistful, longing for memories she couldn't quite grasp. I wish I remembered more. I think, Eliza said carefully, that even if you don't remember specific things, she's still part of you, in your kindness and your curiosity and the way you see the world. Those things don't come from nowhere. Papa says that too. Lucy snuggled deeper into her quilts, her eyes already heavy. He says Mama lives on in me, that as long as I'm here, she's not really gone. Your papa is right about a lot of things. Miss Eliza? Lucy's voice was sleepy now, drifting. I'm glad you're here. Even if people in town are mean, I like having you in our house. It feels more like a family now. Eliza's throat tightened, emotion welling up faster than she could contain it. I like being here too, she whispered. Promise you won't leave? Not like the others? The request was impossible, unfair, the kind of promise Eliza had sworn she'd never make. But looking down at this child's face, so trusting, so hopeful, still carrying the fear of the snake and the deeper fear of being left behind, she found herself saying, I'm not planning to go anywhere. It wasn't quite a promise, but it was close enough to satisfy Lucy, who smiled and closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, with her hand wrapped around Eliza's. Eliza sat in the dimness, listening to the girl's breathing even out, and wondered what she'd just done. When had she stopped being able to leave? When had this temporary position become something that felt permanent, essential, woven into the fabric of her daily existence? She asked you to promise. Nathan's voice came from the doorway, so quiet she almost didn't hear it. Eliza turned, finding him leaning against the doorframe, his face half in shadow. I couldn't, not honestly, but I couldn't refuse her either. I know the feeling. He stepped into the room, moving with careful quiet so as not to wake his daughter. She has a way of asking for the things you can't give, then making you want to give them anyway. She gets that from you, I think, that quiet way of expecting the best from people. Nathan's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. My wife used to say I was stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery. I don't think she'd recognize expecting the best as one of my qualities. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife directly, with something like fondness rather than just grief. Eliza watched him look at his daughter, his face softening in the lamplight, and saw the love there, deep and protective and slightly desperate. The love of someone who'd already lost too much. She would have liked you, he said suddenly. Sarah, she would have appreciated how you are with Lucy, how patient you are, how you don't talk down to her or dismiss her questions. She seems like she was a remarkable woman. She was. Nathan moved to the window, looking out at the dark ranch beyond. Everyone loved her. She had this way of making people feel seen, valued. When she died, it was like someone had turned off a lamp in a dark room. Everything got colder. Liza stood carefully, not wanting to disturb Lucy, and joined him at the window. Outside, stars blazed in a sky so clear it seemed impossible. The kind of night sky you only got this far from cities and crowds. Today, with the snake, Nathan continued, his voice low and rough, I saw it happen again in my mind. losing her, losing Lucy. I saw how quickly everything can be taken away, how little control we actually have. And I thought, he stopped, his jaw working. I thought about how Lucy's right. This house does feel more like a family now. How you've become part of our daily rhythm without either of us really noticing. And how losing that would be another kind of grief. Eliza's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. Nathan, I'm not asking you to promise anything, he interrupted, still not looking at her. I know you have your own life, your own reasons for moving on when you're ready. I'm just saying that if you decide to stay longer, if you want to stay, there's a place for you here, not just as an employee, as someone who matters. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Eliza knew she should deflect, should remind him about maintaining boundaries, should protect them both from the complication of caring too much. Instead, she heard herself say, I don't know how to stay. I've been leaving for so long, it's the only thing I know how to do well. Nathan turned then, finally meeting her eyes. In the dim light, his face was open in a way she'd never seen before, vulnerable and honest. Maybe it's time to learn something new. Before she could respond, before she could process what he was offering and what it might mean, Lucy stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. The moment broke, reality reasserting itself. They were standing in a child's bedroom, having a conversation that felt too big for the space, too dangerous for people who'd known each other only a matter of weeks. I should go, Eliza whispered. Let you both rest. Nathan nodded, stepping back to give her room to pass. But as she moved toward the door, he caught her hand, just for a moment, just long enough for her to feel the calluses on his palm and the warmth of his skin. Thank you, he said quietly, for being here today, for staying with her, for... He trailed off, then released her hand. Just thank you. Eliza fled to her small room off the kitchen, closing the door and leaning against it with her heart racing and her mind spinning. This was dangerous, this caring, this attachment, this growing sense that she'd found something worth staying for. All of it was dangerous. She'd built her life around not needing anyone, not letting anyone need her, keeping herself free to leave at a moment's notice. But Lucy's sleepy request and Nathan's quiet honesty had cracked something open inside her, and she didn't know how to seal it back up again. Sleep didn't come easily that night. She lay awake listening to the house settle, to the wind in the eaves, to the distant sound of cattle moving in the darkness. And she thought about promises she'd made to herself, and promises she'd just halfway made to a 6-year-old girl, and how the two couldn't coexist. Something would have to give. Something always did. Morning came too early, pulling her from restless dreams into the familiar routine of pre-dawn preparation. She lit the lamps, stoked the fire in the stove, began assembling breakfast for the ranch hands who'd be arriving soon. The physical motions grounded her, reminded her of her purpose here, her role. But when Lucy appeared at dawn, earlier than usual, and climbed wordlessly into Eliza's lap while she sat peeling potatoes, when the girl just curled against her chest and breathed, Eliza knew she was lying to herself about being able to maintain distance. Bad dreams? She asked softly, wrapping her arms around the small body. Lucy nodded against her shoulder. Snakes everywhere. And then you were leaving, packing your bag, and I tried to stop you, but you didn't hear me. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere today. But someday. The question was too large for morning, too honest for the careful dance they'd been doing. Eliza tightened her hold on Lucy, breathing in the scent of the girl's hair, soap and sunshine and something indefinably sweet. I don't know what someday looks like, she admitted, but I know I'm here now. Can that be enough? Lucy was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, I guess it has to be. The resignation in that small voice broke something in Eliza. This child had already learned not to count on permanence, already understood that people left and that wanting them to stay wasn't enough to keep them. No 6-year-old should have to carry that knowledge. Nathan found them like that when he came down 20 minutes later. Eliza in the chair by the stove, Lucy in her lap, both of them quiet and holding on. He stopped in the doorway, and Eliza saw his expression shift through several emotions before settling on something that looked like determination. Lucy girl, why don't you go get dressed? Pick your blue dress, the one with the buttons. But it's not Sunday. I know. Pick it anyway. Lucy scrambled down, casting confused glances between the adults before hurrying upstairs. The moment she was gone, Nathan moved into the kitchen, his presence filling the space in that way he had. "We're going to town today," he announced. "All three of us. I need to pick up supplies, and I want you both with me." Eliza stood, smoothing her apron with nervous hands. "Nathan, that's not necessary. The talk will only get worse if—" "I don't care about the talk." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "I care that my daughter had nightmares about you leaving. I care that she's learning to accept loss as inevitable. And I care that you're being treated like a criminal in a town where half the population has done worse than you're accused of and never faced a whisper of judgment. You can't control what people think." "No, but I can control how I respond to it." He stepped closer, his eyes intense. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about not knowing how to stay. And I realized something. You can't learn to stay if everyone around you keeps confirming that you don't belong. So we're going to town, and we're going to walk in together, and we're going to show them that you're not going anywhere. That's not going to change their minds. Maybe not, but it might change yours." The statement landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. He was right, Eliza realized. She'd been so focused on what the town thought, on managing their judgment and avoiding their scrutiny, that she'd forgotten the real question. What did she think? What did she want? "Why does it matter to you?" she asked quietly. "Why do you care whether I stay or go?" Nathan was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as he seemed to struggle with words. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with honesty. "Because this house has been half empty since Sarah died. I've been going through the motions: work, eat, sleep, take care of Lucy, repeat. Existing, but not living. And then you arrived, and suddenly there was warmth again. Laughter. The smell of baking bread. Someone singing while they work. Someone who sees Lucy not as a responsibility, but as the remarkable person she is." He paused, then added more quietly, "Someone who makes me remember what it feels like to look forward to coming inside at the end of the day." Eliza's breath caught. "Nathan, I'm not asking for anything you can't give," he continued. "I'm not expecting promises or commitments. I just want you to know that you have value here beyond your cooking skills. You matter. To Lucy. To me. And I'll be damned if I let a bunch of small-minded gossips chase you away without putting up a fight." Before Eliza could respond, before she could even begin to process what he'd just said, Lucy's voice called from upstairs, asking if her hair ribbons were in the wash. The moment fractured, reality intruding on the confession that had felt pulled from somewhere deep and protected. Nathan stepped back, his expression closing somewhat, though not entirely. "Get ready. We leave in an hour." The ride into town was quiet. Lucy chattering about seeing the general store and maybe getting peppermints if she was good, while Nathan and Eliza exchanged occasional glances that carried the weight of unfinished conversations. The morning was crisp, autumn asserting itself in the gold-tinged grass and the bite in the air. Dry Creek looked the same as always: dusty street, weathered buildings, people moving about their business with determined purpose. But as Nathan pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store, Eliza felt every eye turn toward them. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Women clutched their shopping baskets tighter. Even the men loitering outside the saloon went still, watching. "Ready?" Nathan asked, his voice low. Eliza wanted to say no. Wanted to suggest she wait in the wagon, or better yet, back at the ranch where judgment couldn't reach her. But Lucy was already climbing down, her small hand reaching back for Eliza's, and Nathan was looking at her with something like hope in his eyes. "Ready?" she lied. They walked into the general store together, Nathan, Lucy between them holding both their hands, forming a united front that broadcast family more clearly than words ever could. The store owner, Mr. Jenkins, looked up from his ledger and his expression cycled through surprise, discomfort, and finally resignation. "Hail, Miss Moore." "Jenkins!" Nathan's voice was cordial but firm. "Need to pick up my standing order, plus some additional supplies." He handed over a list, and Eliza noticed his hand stayed on Lucy's shoulder, proprietary and protective. While Jenkins gathered their items, other customers filtered in and out. Mrs. Patterson entered, took one look at their group, and pivoted so fast her skirts nearly caught in the door. Another woman, Mrs. Chen, the laundress Lucy had mentioned, paused in her shopping to stare openly, her expression impossible to read. "Miss Moore." Mrs. Chen's voice was quiet, uncertain. She glanced at the store owner, then back at Eliza. I owe you an apology for the other day, when you brought the washing. I shouldn't have been so cold." The statement hung in the air, unexpected and disarming. Eliza found herself momentarily speechless. "Agatha." Mrs. Patterson's voice came from the doorway, sharp with warning. She'd returned, apparently unable to resist the pull of potential drama. "You don't need to—" "Yes, I do." Mrs. Chen straightened her spine, and Eliza saw steel beneath the quiet exterior. "I listened to gossip without knowing facts. That was wrong. My husband reminded me that we came to this country with nothing and faced judgment from people who decided we didn't belong. He said if we start doing the same to others, we're no better than those who judged us." "Her husband is a wise man," Nathan said quietly. Mrs. Chen nodded, then looked at Eliza directly. "I don't know if you're guilty of what people say, but I know that judging without evidence makes me guilty of something worse, so I apologize." "Thank you," Eliza managed, her throat tight. "That means more than you know." Mrs. Patterson made a sound of disgust. "This is ridiculous. Agatha, you're making a spectacle of yourself, and you—" She turned to Nathan, her face pinched with disapproval. "You're making a mistake keeping that woman in your house. What kind of example does that set for your daughter?" Lucy's hand tightened in Eliza's, and Eliza felt a surge of protective anger. But before she could speak, Nathan stepped forward, his entire bearing shifting into something harder, more dangerous. "Mrs. Patterson." His voice was cold enough to freeze water. "What happens in my house and who I employ is none of your concern. Miss Moore has proven herself to be a woman of integrity and skill. My daughter is thriving under her care. Those are facts. Everything else is speculation and malicious gossip, which, I might remind you, is explicitly condemned as a sin in the book you claim to read every Sunday." Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red. "How dare you? No. How dare you spread rumors about someone who's done nothing to deserve your judgment? How dare you try to poison this community against a woman you've never bothered to know? How dare you presume to tell me how to raise my child or run my household?" The store had gone completely silent. Even Mr. Jenkins had stopped moving, his hands frozen mid-reach for a can of beans. Every eye was locked on Nathan, on the quiet rancher who rarely raised his voice and never caused trouble. "Miss Moore was acquitted of the charges against her," Nathan continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "That means she was found innocent by a jury of her peers, but you've decided to play judge anyway, to condemn her based on nothing but your own need to feel superior. That says more about you than it ever could about her. She's a thief. She's family." The words rang out clear and certain, stopping Mrs. Patterson mid-sentence. Nathan reached out and pulled Lucy closer, his other hand coming to rest on Eliza's shoulder, a gesture of claim and protection that left no room for misinterpretation. "Miss Moore is part of my household, under my protection, and any insult to her is an insult to me. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with me directly, but leave her alone." Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened and closed several times, no sound emerging. Finally, she gathered her skirts and swept from the store with all the dignity she could muster, which wasn't much given the circumstances. The silence that followed was deafening. Eliza stood frozen, Nathan's hand still warm on her shoulder, Lucy pressed against her side, and wondered what exactly had just happened. He'd called her family, in front of witnesses, in front of the town gossip who would spread that declaration faster than fire through kindling. "Well," Mr. Jenkins cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "That was, quite something." He finished gathering their supplies with renewed speed, clearly eager to have them gone so he could process what he'd witnessed. "This everything you need?" "Yes. Thank you, Jenkins." Nathan's voice had returned to its normal level tone, as if he hadn't just publicly defended Eliza against the most powerful gossip in 3 counties. They loaded their supplies in silence, Lucy unusually quiet between them. It wasn't until they were back in the wagon and heading out of town that she spoke. "Papa, what does it mean when you said Miss Eliza is family?" Nathan's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice was steady. "It means she belongs with us, that she has a place in our home and in our lives, that we protect her the way family protects family." "Like how you protect me?" "Exactly like that." Lucy absorbed this, then smiled, bright and genuine and full of a hope that made Eliza's heart ache. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that. I've been telling Miss Eliza for weeks that she feels like family, but I don't think she believed me." Eliza couldn't speak. Her throat had closed around words too big to force out, emotions too complicated to name. Nathan had just changed everything with a simple declaration, had drawn a line in the sand and dared anyone to challenge it. He'd made her visible when she'd spent years trying to disappear, had claimed her as his when she'd sworn she'd never belong to anyone again. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. It was everything she'd wanted and everything she'd feared wrapped up together until she couldn't tell the difference between them. "Eliza." Nathan's voice was quiet, meant only for her beneath Lucy's renewed chatter. "I meant what I said, all of it." She turned to look at him, this man who'd given her a job when she was desperate, who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd just publicly defended her honor without hesitation. His face was calm, certain, showing none of the doubt that plagued her constantly. "I know," she whispered. "That's what scares me." His mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile. "Good. Being scared means it matters. And things that matter are worth being scared for." The weeks following Nathan's public declaration brought an uneasy shift to their lives. Some people in town, emboldened by Mrs. Chen's apology, began treating Eliza with cautious civility. Others doubled down on their disapproval, their silence more cutting than any words. But through it all, the ranch remained a sanctuary, a place where Eliza could breathe without feeling judged, where her hands found purpose in work, where Lucy's laughter filled rooms that had been silent too long. October deepened into November, bringing frost that silvered the grass each morning and winds that howled down from the mountains with the promise of winter. Nathan and his ranch hands worked longer hours, preparing for the brutal months ahead, reinforcing shelters, stockpiling feed, bringing cattle down from the high pastures. Eliza watched him come in each night exhausted, his face drawn with fatigue, his hands raw from cold and work. "You're pushing too hard," she told him one evening as she pressed a cup of coffee into those damaged hands. The ranch hands had already eaten and left, and Lucy was upstairs practicing her letters by lamplight. "Winter doesn't wait for us to be ready." Nathan's voice was rough with tiredness. "There's still the south fence to mend. The hay barn roof needs patching before the snow comes, and we've got at least 50 head still scattered in the upper reaches." "You can't do everything alone." "I'm not alone. I have 4 good men working with me. 4 men and 1 stubborn fool who thinks he's invincible." The words came out sharper than Eliza intended, born from watching him drive himself relentlessly day after day. Nathan looked up at her, surprise flickering across his exhausted features. "I'm not being stubborn. I'm being responsible. This ranch is all Lucy has. If I don't keep it running, if I don't maintain it properly, she'll have nothing when I'm gone." "She'll have nothing if you work yourself to death before she's grown," Eliza shot back. "She needs you alive more than she needs a perfect ranch." Something in Nathan's expression cracked, the careful control he maintained slipping just enough to show the fear beneath. "I know that. Don't you think I know that? But I also know how quickly everything can be taken away. Sarah was healthy one day and gone 3 days later. My father built this ranch from nothing and lost it all to drought when I was 12. Nothing is guaranteed, nothing is safe. The only thing I can control is working hard enough that maybe we'll survive whatever comes next." Eliza set down the coffee pot and pulled out the chair beside him, sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Nathan, listen to me. You're surviving, but you're not living. There's a difference. Living is a luxury I can't afford." "It's not a luxury. It's the whole point." She reached out and covered one of his battered hands with her own, feeling the calluses and scars that told stories of years spent fighting against elements and odds. "Lucy doesn't need a perfect ranch. She needs a father who smiles sometimes, who sits with her at dinner instead of falling asleep at the table. who's present enough to see her growing up instead of being so focused on the future that he misses the now. Nathan stared at their joined hands, his jaw working as emotions played across his face. Resistance, recognition, something that looked like grief for time already lost. "I don't know how to do anything halfway," he said finally. "I've never been able to. Sarah used to say it was my best and worst quality, that I gave everything to what I loved, but sometimes that meant I forgot to save something for myself." "She sounds like she knew you well." "She did." His voice softened, memory gentling the harsh edges of exhaustion. "She'd come out to the barn sometimes when I'd been working too late and physically drag me back to the house. She'd stand in front of me with her hands on her hips and tell me that I was being an idiot, that the ranch would be here tomorrow, but this moment wouldn't." He paused, then added quietly, "I miss her. Every day I miss having someone who cared enough to tell me when I was being a fool." The vulnerability in his admission made Eliza's chest tight. "I'm telling you now," she said gently. "You're being a fool. A well-intentioned, hard-working fool, but a fool nonetheless." Nathan's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You think you've earned the right to call me a fool?" "I think someone needs to, and I'm the only one here brave enough or stupid enough to try." This time he did smile, tired but genuine. "Both, probably. You'd have to be a little stupid to stay here putting up with me and the gossip and this isolated existence." Or maybe I'm exactly where I want to be," Eliza said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. When had that happened? When had this temporary position, this way station on her endless journey, become something she actively chose rather than simply endured? Nathan turned his hand over beneath hers, his fingers curling around her palm in a gesture that felt intimate and significant. "Are you where you want to be?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them seemed quite ready to voice. Eliza thought about Boston, about the life she'd fled and couldn't return to. She thought about the towns she'd passed through, the jobs she'd taken and left, the constant movement that had defined her existence for 2 years. And then she thought about this kitchen, this house, this quiet man and his extraordinary daughter who'd somehow become the center of her world. "Yes," she whispered. "I think I am." Before either of them could say more, Lucy's footsteps sounded on the stairs, quick and light. They pulled apart, though not quickly enough to avoid Lucy's knowing look as she entered the kitchen. "Were you holding hands?" the girl asked with the directness only children possessed. "I was checking your father's hands for blisters," Eliza said, standing and busying herself at the stove to hide her flushed face. "He's been working too hard." "That's true. Papa always works too hard." Lucy climbed into her father's lap, tucking herself against his chest with the ease of long practice. "Miss Eliza's right, you know. You need to rest more." Nathan wrapped his arms around his daughter, his expression softening in that way it only did for her. "You two are ganging up on me." "Because we love you," Lucy said simply, "and you're being stubborn." That seems to be the consensus. Watching them together, this small family that had somehow expanded to include her, Eliza felt a wave of contentment so profound it frightened her. This was what she'd run from, what she'd convinced herself she couldn't have: belonging, connection, the simple joy of being needed and wanted. The danger wasn't that it wouldn't last. The danger was that it would, and she'd finally have something real to lose. The storm came on a Tuesday, rolling in from the north with a violence that shocked even the old-timers who'd seen decades of frontier winters. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in 2 hours. The wind picked up until it screamed around the corners of the buildings, rattling windows and tearing at anything not secured. And then the rain came, cold and driving, the kind that soaked through clothing in seconds and turned the ground to sucking mud. Nathan and the ranch hands had been in the far pasture when it hit, checking on the last scattered cattle. Eliza stood at the kitchen window, watching the world disappear behind sheets of rain, and felt anxiety coil tight in her stomach. They should have been back by now. They'd left at dawn, promising to return by mid-afternoon at the latest. It was nearly evening now, and there was no sign of them. Lucy pressed close to Eliza's side, unusually quiet. "Papa will be okay, won't he? He knows these pastures better than anyone." "Of course he will." Eliza tried to sound confident, but her own fear was a living thing in her chest. She'd heard stories about people caught in storms like this, about how quickly cold and wet could turn deadly, about horses that lost their footing in mud and men who got separated from their groups and wandered until hypothermia claimed them. By the time darkness fell, Eliza had worn a path in the kitchen floor from pacing. She'd fed Lucy dinner neither of them wanted, banked the fire high to have warmth ready for when the men returned, and set water to heating for the coffee and tea they'd need. But mostly she'd watch the windows and listen for sounds that never came. "Miss Eliza, I'm scared." Lucy's voice was small, and when Eliza looked down, she saw tears tracking down the girl's face. "What if something happened to Papa? What if he doesn't come back?" Eliza knelt immediately, gathering the child into her arms. "Your father is strong and smart and knows this land better than anyone. He'll come back. He always comes back to you." "Mama didn't come back." The words were barely a whisper, but they cut through Eliza like a blade. "She went upstairs to rest because she felt sick, and then she never came back. People don't always come back, even when you need them to." There was nothing Eliza could say to that brutal truth. Instead, she just held Lucy tighter, rocking slightly, offering the only comfort she could give: presence, warmth, the physical reassurance that at least one person wasn't going anywhere. They were still sitting like that when the door finally crashed open and Nathan stumbled in, soaked to the bone and supporting one of the ranch hands who looked barely conscious. The other 3 men followed, equally drenched, their faces drawn with exhaustion and cold. "Fire," Nathan barked, his voice rough. "And blankets." Collins took a fall, hit his head. "He's been in and out for the last hour." Eliza was already moving, Lucy forgotten as training and instinct took over. She'd grown up in a household that valued practical skills, had learned basic medicine and emergency care from a mother who'd believed women needed to be prepared for anything. Those lessons came back now as she helped lower Collins into a chair near the fire, assessing his pupils and the ugly bruise spreading across his temple. "When did it happen?" she asked, already reaching for clean cloths and the whiskey they kept for medicinal purposes. 2 hours ago, maybe 3. His horse spooked at lightning and threw him into a ravine. Nathan was stripping off his soaked coat with hands that shook from cold. "We couldn't get back faster, had to lead the horses on foot, couldn't risk another fall." "You did right." Eliza pressed a cloth to the wound on Collins's head, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. "Lucy, I need you to get the quilts from the chest in my room, all of them, and you men—" She fixed the other ranch hands with a stern look. "Get those wet clothes off and wrap yourselves in whatever blankets you can find. I'll have hot coffee in 5 minutes." They obeyed without argument, perhaps too cold and tired to question being ordered around by the cook. Nathan lingered, though, watching Eliza work on Collins with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "Is he going to be all right?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. Head wounds are tricky, but he's conscious now, which is good, and the bleeding isn't as bad as I feared. We'll watch him tonight, keep him warm and awake. If he makes it through without getting worse, he'll probably be fine." "How do you know all this?" Eliza kept her hands moving, cleaning the wound with efficient motions. "My mother was a practical woman. She believed in being prepared. She taught me and my sisters basic medicine, sewing, cooking, everything we might need to survive without relying on anyone else." She paused, then added more softly. "Turns out she was right to worry. Those skills have saved me more than once." Nathan was chanting for a moment, then said, "You're full of surprises, Eliza Moore." She glanced up at him, taking in his soaked clothing, his pale face, the way he was barely standing. "And you're freezing. Go change before you catch pneumonia. I can handle this." "I know you can." But he didn't move immediately, his eyes holding hers with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you. For being here. For knowing what to do." "Where else would I be?" The question seemed to strike him somehow, his face shifting through emotions too quick to catalog. But then Lucy was back with the quilts, and the other men were emerging wrapped in blankets, looking like damp, miserable ghosts, and the moment was gone. The night stretched long and tense. Eliza kept Collins awake by talking to him, asking questions about his family back east, his plans for the future, anything to keep him engaged and conscious. She checked his pupils every hour, watching for the signs of serious injury she'd been taught to recognize. The other men rotated through watches, too keyed up from the close call to sleep despite their exhaustion. Nathan changed into dry clothes but refused to rest, hovering nearby with a restlessness that spoke of guilt and responsibility. Lucy eventually fell asleep on the sofa, wrapped in one of the quilts, worn out by fear and relief. Around 2 in the morning, when Collins's eyes were finally focusing properly and his words were coming without the earlier confusion, Nathan touched Eliza's shoulder. "Step outside with me for a minute. You need a break." She wanted to argue, to insist Collins still needed watching, but Nathan was already gesturing to one of the other hands to take over. So she followed him out onto the porch, into air that had cleared with the storm's passing, cold and sharp and clean. The stars were out now, brilliant in the washed sky. The ranch lay quiet around them, water dripping from eaves and fence posts. The ground a muddy mess that would take days to dry. But they'd survived. Everyone had made it back. "That was too close," Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "Collins could have died out there. We all could have. One wrong step, one more hour of cold, and..." He trailed off, his hands gripping the porch rail tight enough that his knuckles showed white. "But you didn't. You're all here, alive and safe. Because we were lucky. Because the storm broke when it did. Because you knew what to do when we got back." He turned to face her, and in the starlight she could see the fear he was finally letting show. "I was out there thinking about Lucy, about her losing me the same way she lost her mother, about you having to be the one to tell her that her father wasn't coming home. And I realized..." He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "Realized what?" "That you're the person I trust with the most important thing in my life. That if something happened to me, you're the one I'd want raising my daughter. That somewhere along the way, you stopped being just the cook and became..." He paused, then said simply, "essential." Eliza's breath caught. "Nathan, I'm not saying this to make things complicated or to pressure you into anything," he continued quickly. "I'm saying it because it's true and because I almost died today without having said it. You matter, Eliza. To Lucy, yes, but also to me. More than I knew how to admit before tonight. She should step back, should maintain the careful distance they'd been preserving. But instead she moved closer, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair, the vulnerability he was allowing her to witness. "You matter to me too," she whispered, "so much that it terrifies me." "Good." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle despite his work-roughened hands. "Fear means it's real, means it's worth protecting." They stood like that for a long moment, close enough to kiss but not quite touching, the space between them charged with possibility and promise. Then Lucy's voice called from inside, sleepy and seeking reassurance, and the spell broke. "We should go in," Nathan said, but he was smiling slightly, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less burdened. "We should," Eliza agreed. But neither of them moved immediately, both reluctant to end this fragile moment of honesty. Finally, Nathan stepped back, though his hand lingered on her arm for just a second longer. "Things are going to change after this. Between us. Is that all right?" Eliza thought about all the reasons she should say no, should protect herself, should keep running. And then she thought about Lucy sleeping inside, about this man who'd defended her to an entire town, about the home they'd built together without either of them quite realizing it. "Yes," she said, "that's all right." The days following the storm brought both relief and tension. Collins recovered fully, the bruise on his head fading to yellow-green, his good humor returning along with his health. The men talked about their close call with the mixture of bravado and genuine fear that came from having looked death in the face and lived to tell about it. And the ranch slowly returned to its normal rhythms, though something fundamental had shifted. Nathan sought out Eliza more often now, small moments of connection that felt stolen and precious. A hand on her back as he passed in the kitchen, conversations that stretched longer than necessary, looks that carried weight and meaning, nothing overt, nothing that would confuse Lucy or make the ranch hands uncomfortable, but enough that Eliza felt it constantly, the pull toward something more, something deeper, something that felt inevitable and terrifying in equal measure. Lucy noticed, of course. Children always did. She began making pointed comments about how nice it was when Papa smiled, how Miss Eliza made Papa happy, How some of her friends in town had new mothers because their papas had remarried, and wasn't that nice? The statements were artless and transparent, a 6-year-old's attempt at matchmaking, but they made both adults squirm with their accuracy. "She's not subtle," Nathan said one afternoon, watching through the window as Lucy played in the yard, making elaborate stories with her dolls that seemed to heavily feature weddings and happy families. "She's young, and she wants—" Eliza trailed off, not quite sure how to finish that sentence. "A mother. I know." Nathan's voice was heavy. "She asks me sometimes why I don't want to marry again. How do I explain to a 6-year-old that it's not about not wanting to, that it's about being terrified of loving someone that much again, of having something that important to lose? Maybe you don't explain it. Maybe you just—" Eliza paused, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe you just let her see that love is worth the risk anyway." Nathan looked at her then, really looked at her, and Eliza felt the full force of his attention. "Is it worth the risk?" The question was loaded with more than curiosity. It was a request for permission, for reassurance, for confirmation that she was as invested in this fragile thing between them as he was. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent 2 years running from the risk of caring too much. But I think—" She swallowed hard, gathering courage. "I think maybe I'm tired of running." Before Nathan could respond, before either of them could push the conversation toward the conclusion it seemed to be racing toward, Lucy's scream cut through the afternoon air like a blade. They were both moving instantly, running toward the sound without thought or hesitation. Eliza reached the yard first and felt her heart stop at what she saw. Lucy on the ground, clutching her leg, blood seeping between her small fingers. And behind her, the old garden rake that Eliza had warned needed to be put away, its rusty tines pointing skyward. "I didn't see it," Lucy sobbed. "I was running, and I didn't see it, and it went right through my boot, and it hurts, Miss Eliza. It hurts so bad." Nathan was already scooping his daughter up, his face gone white with fear. "How deep? Can you tell how deep it went?" Eliza carefully moved Lucy's hands, assessing the wound. It was bad. The tine had punched through the leather of Lucy's boot and into the meat of her calf, deep enough to bleed heavily, but not, thank heaven, deep enough to have hit anything vital. But it was dirty, rust and soil driven into the wound, and Eliza knew what that meant even as Nathan was realizing it. "We need to clean it immediately," she said, keeping her voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Get her inside. I'll need hot water, clean cloths, and the whiskey." The next hour was one of the worst of Eliza's life. Lucy was brave, trying not to cry, but the pain as they cleaned the wound was obviously intense. Nathan held his daughter, his face twisted with anguish, while Eliza worked with steady hands despite her racing heart. The wound had to be thoroughly cleaned. Rust and tetanus were killers out here, where doctors were hours away, and modern medicine was more hope than reality. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Eliza murmured as Lucy whimpered. "I know it hurts. You're being so brave. Just a little more." "Make it stop," Lucy pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Please make it stop." Nathan was crying too, Eliza realized, silent tears tracking down his face as he held his daughter through her pain. "I've got you, Lucy girl. Papa's got you. You're going to be okay." Finally, when the wound was as clean as Eliza could make it, she bound it tightly and stepped back, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. "She needs to stay off it for at least a week, and we need to watch for signs of infection, fever, red streaks spreading from the wound, increased pain. If any of those develop, we'll need to get her to a doctor, storm or no storm." Nathan nodded, not seeming to trust his voice. He carried Lucy to the sofa, settling her carefully with pillows under her leg, and then simply sat beside her, holding her hand and stroking her hair as she finally, exhaustedly, fell asleep. Eliza cleaned up the medical supplies with mechanical efficiency, her mind already running through everything that could go wrong, all the ways this could turn deadly. She'd done her best, but would it be enough? Out here, so far from real medical care, would her knowledge and Nathan's hope be sufficient to save this child they both loved? When she finally sat down, boneless with exhaustion and fear, Nathan looked at her with an expression that held too many emotions to name. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Again, always. You keep saving us." "I didn't save her yet. We won't know for days if—" Her voice broke. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the fear that Lucy might still be lost to something as mundane and cruel as an infection from a rusty rake. Don't. Nathan reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. Don't go to the worst place. Not yet. She's young and strong. She'll fight this. You can't know that. No. But I can choose to believe it. And I can choose to be grateful that you were here, that you knew what to do, that my daughter has someone who loves her enough to... He stopped, his eyes widening slightly at what he'd just said. The word hung in the air between them. Love. Eliza hadn't let herself think it before, had kept it locked away where it couldn't complicate things further. But hearing Nathan say it, seeing it reflected in his face, she knew it was true. She loved Lucy. She loved this child with a fierceness that had crept up on her gradually, and then all at once, until the thought of losing her was physically painful. I do, she whispered. Love her. I didn't mean to. I wasn't planning to. But I do. Nathan's hand tightened on hers. I know. I've watched it happen. Watched you go from keeping careful distance to being unable to hide how much you care. It's been... He paused, searching for words. Extraordinary. Seeing her loved by someone who didn't have to choose to love her but did anyway. How could I not? She's remarkable. She is. She's also terrified right now, even in sleep. Look at her face. Eliza looked and saw it. The tension around Lucy's closed eyes, the furrow between her brows, the way her small hands clutched at her father's shirt, even unconscious. The child was afraid, caught in dreams that likely reflected her waking terror. I should stay with her tonight, Eliza said, in case she wakes and needs something. We both should. Nathan's voice was firm. I'm not leaving her, and He met her eyes directly. I don't want you to leave either. I want us to be here together when she wakes up. I want her to see that she has both of us. The statement was more declaration than request, and Eliza understood what he was really saying. This was no longer about employee and employer, cook and ranch owner. This was about something deeper, something that couldn't be easily defined or dismissed. They were becoming a unit, the three of them, bound together by care and fear and love in all its complicated forms. All right, she agreed softly. I'll stay. They kept vigil together as darkness fell and the house settled into night quiet around them. Eliza dozed in her chair, jerking awake every time Lucy stirred or made a sound. Nathan didn't seem to sleep at all, just sat watching his daughter with an intensity that spoke of prayers being offered to whoever might be listening, bargains being made with fate itself. Around midnight, Lucy woke with a cry, disoriented and frightened. Papa, Miss Eliza. We're here, sweetheart. Eliza was beside her instantly, checking her forehead for fever, finding it warm but not alarming. Both of us. How are you feeling? It hurts, and I'm scared. What if I can't walk anymore? What if my leg doesn't work right? Your leg is going to be fine, Nathan said with absolute conviction. The wound was clean. Miss Eliza took excellent care of you. You just need to rest and heal. But what if... No, what ifs? Eliza smoothed the hair back from Lucy's face, her touch gentle. We're going to take this one day at a time. Tomorrow you'll feel better than today. The next day better still. And before you know it, you'll be running around like nothing ever happened. Lucy was quiet for a moment, then said in a small voice, I was careless. You told me to watch where I was going, and I didn't, and now I ruined everything. You didn't ruin anything, Nathan said firmly. Accidents happen. You're not to blame for this. But if I'd been more careful, then maybe this wouldn't have happened, or maybe something else would have. You can't live your whole life being so careful that you never make mistakes. Nathan's voice was rough with emotion. That's not living, that's just existing. And I won't have my daughter being so afraid of getting hurt that she stops running and playing and being 6 years old. Eliza saw the deeper meaning behind his words, the lesson he was teaching himself as much as his daughter. This man who'd been so careful since his wife's death, who'd controlled everything he could control to prevent another loss, he was finally understanding that control was an illusion, that life happened regardless of precautions, that love required risk. Will you both stay here tonight? Lucy asked, her eyes heavy again. I don't want to be alone. We're not going anywhere, Eliza promised, settling back into her chair. Will you be here in the morning too? And the morning after that? The question was pointed, seeking reassurance that went beyond just this crisis. Lucy was asking something bigger. Will you stay? Will you be here always? Will you be my mother? Eliza looked at Nathan, finding him already watching her with an expression that mirrored the hope in his daughter's voice. He wanted an answer too. They both did. And Eliza realized with startling clarity that she'd already made her choice, probably weeks ago, possibly that very first day when Lucy had wrapped sticky fingers around her hand and declared she made excellent biscuits. Yes, she said clearly, looking at both of them. I'll be here, for as long as you want me. Lucy's face transformed with a smile that was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty Eliza had endured to get here. I knew it, the girl whispered. I knew you were supposed to be my mama. I picked you the day you came. I saw you and I just knew. The statement should have been impossible, a child picking a mother the way one might pick a flower or a pretty stone. But looking at Lucy's certain face, at Nathan's tender expression, Eliza found she believed it. Sometimes choice happened in an instant, a moment of recognition that bypassed logic and went straight to the heart. You picked well, Nathan said softly, his eyes never leaving Eliza's face. Better than I could have imagined. And there it was, the acknowledgement, the acceptance, the opening of a door they'd both been circling for weeks. Eliza felt terror and joy in equal measure, the weight of commitment settling onto her shoulders, along with the lightness of finally being chosen. They sat like that through the night, Lucy sleeping between them, the lamp burning low, the house quiet around them. And when dawn finally came, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, Eliza woke to find Nathan watching her with an expression so full of tenderness it made her throat tight. Morning, he whispered. Morning. She checked Lucy automatically, finding her sleeping peacefully, her forehead cool beneath Eliza's palm. Fever's down. That's good. Everything's good. Nathan stood, stretching the stiffness from his back, then moved around the sofa to stand beside Eliza's chair. Better than good. Better than I thought possible. Before she could respond, before she could second-guess or retreat back into fear, he bent and kissed her forehead, brief and chaste and loaded with promise. Thank you, he said simply, for staying, for choosing us, for being brave enough to let yourself care. Eliza looked up at him, this good man who'd given her sanctuary when she needed it most, who'd defended her honor and trusted her heart and made space for her in his life without demands or conditions. Thank you for making me want to stay. Lucy stirred between them, her eyes fluttering open. Are you kissing? She asked hopefully. Not yet, Nathan said, his mouth quirking in amusement. But maybe someday soon. Good. Lucy's smile was satisfied, like a general who'd just won a difficult campaign. I've been working very hard to make that happen. It was getting exhausting. Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the uncertainty that still lingered, Eliza laughed. This child, this impossible, wonderful, perceptive child who'd decided Eliza belonged in her family and had worked tirelessly to make it so. You're a schemer, Lucy Hale, she said, unable to keep the affection from her voice. I'm a girl who knows what she wants. Lucy reached out and took both their hands, pulling them together over her small body. And I want us to be a family. A real family. Is that okay? Nathan's hand was warm beneath Eliza's, his fingers curling around hers in a gesture that felt like both question and answer. That's more than okay, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That's everything. And Eliza, who'd spent 2 years running from the very idea of family, found herself nodding through sudden tears. Everything, she echoed. It wasn't the ending she'd expected when she first stepped off that stagecoach in Dry Creek, but it was the one she'd been searching for without knowing it, a place to belong, people to love, a reason to stop running and start building something that might last. The road to that moment hadn't been easy, and the road ahead wouldn't be either, she knew that. There would be challenges still to face, gossip still to endure, moments of doubt and fear to overcome. But for now, sitting in the early morning light with Nathan's hand in hers and Lucy's smile warming them both, Eliza chose to believe in possibility. She chose to stay. Lucy's recovery became a dance of patience and small victories. The wound healed cleanly, defying Eliza's worst fears, and within days the girl was demanding to be allowed up, insisting she felt fine despite the lingering tenderness in her leg. Nathan remained cautiously overprotective, carrying her from room to room even when she protested, his face still haunted by how close they'd come to losing her. "Papa, I can walk," Lucy complained on the fourth day, squirming in his arms as he carried her to the kitchen table for breakfast. "My leg barely hurts anymore." "Doctor says another week of rest." Nathan set her down gently, arranging pillows behind her back with exaggerated care. "We didn't see a doctor. Miss Eliza took care of me." "Then Miss Eliza says another week of rest." Lucy turned pleading eyes to Eliza, who was flipping pancakes at the stove. "Do I really have to stay sitting for a whole week? That's forever." "Not forever, just 7 more days. And your father's right. Better to heal completely than to rush it and make things worse." Eliza slid pancakes onto plates, golden and perfect, steam rising into the cool morning air. "Besides, this gives you time to help me plan the Thanksgiving meal. I'll need an assistant since the ranch hands will all be here." The distraction worked, as Eliza had known it would. Lucy's face brightened with interest. "Can we make 3 kinds of pie? And that stuffing with the dried apples you mentioned? And can I help roll out the dough?" "All of that and more. But only if you rest properly now so your leg is strong enough to stand at the counter with me." Nathan caught Eliza's eye over his daughter's head, his expression grateful and something more, warm with an affection that made her pulse quicken. Things between them had shifted since that vigil night, becoming easier and more complicated simultaneously. He sought her out constantly now, finding excuses to be near her, his touches growing bolder even as they remained careful around Lucy. A hand on her back as he passed, fingers brushing as they reached for the same serving dish, looks that lingered long enough to make meaning clear. They hadn't spoken about what was happening between them, hadn't defined or labeled the growing intimacy. But it was there in every interaction, every shared glance, every moment when their world narrowed to just the two of them despite Lucy's constant presence. Eliza felt it like a current pulling her forward, thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. The ranch hands noticed too, their knowing glances and half-hidden smiles suggesting they approved of whatever was developing between their boss and the woman who'd fed them well and earned their respect. Even Collins, still sporting a fading bruise from his fall, made a point of telling Eliza one morning that the boss seemed lighter somehow, less burdened. "Haven't seen him like this since before Mrs. Hale passed," the ranch hand said, accepting a second cup of coffee with a grateful nod. "It's good. He's been alone too long, carrying too much. Man needs someone to share the load with." Eliza didn't know how to respond to that, so she just refilled his cup and changed the subject. But the words stayed with her, echoing through her mind as she worked. Nathan had been alone, she realized, profoundly, achingly alone, despite being surrounded by people who worked for him and a daughter who adored him. He'd built walls after Sarah's death, protective barriers that kept grief contained but also kept connection out. And somehow, without planning to, Eliza had slipped through those walls and found the man inside, lonely and afraid, but still capable of hoping, still willing to risk caring again. The question was whether she was brave enough to let him keep caring, whether she was strong enough to stay when everything in her history screamed that staying meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant loss. "You're thinking too hard," Nathan's voice startled her from her thoughts. The ranch hands had left for their morning work, and Lucy had fallen asleep on the sofa, worn out from the exertion of sitting upright. They were alone in the kitchen for the first time in days. "I'm making bread." "Bread requires thinking." "That's not thinking about bread. That's the face you make when you're worrying about something big." He moved closer, leaning against the counter beside her. "Want to talk about it?" Eliza's hands stilled in the dough, flour dusting her fingers. "I'm not used to this," she admitted quietly. "To staying, to mattering. Every instinct I have tells me to protect myself by keeping distance, but Lucy and you—" She trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. "We make it hard to keep distance," Nathan finished for her. "I know, that's intentional." "Is it?" "Maybe not at first. But now?" "Yes." He reached out and covered one of her flour-covered hands with his own, heedless of the mess. I meant what I said that night, Eliza. You're essential to us, to this house, to Lucy's happiness, to... He paused, seeming to gather courage. To my happiness, too. I didn't think I'd feel this way again. Didn't want to, honestly. But you make me want things I'd written off as impossible. Eliza's throat tightened with emotion. What things? Partnership. Someone to share decisions with, to talk to at the end of a long day. Someone who sees me as more than just Lucy's father or the ranch owner. Someone who makes me remember I'm still a man with needs and wants beyond just surviving. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, the gesture intimate and tender. Someone who makes this house feel like a home again, instead of just a place where we sleep. Nathan, her voice broke on his name. I'm not asking you to make promises you're not ready for. I'm just telling you the truth. What I feel, what I hope for. You can do with that information whatever you need to. Before Eliza could respond, before she could sort through the tangle of fear and hope his words had created, the sound of horses approaching broke the moment. Nathan pulled away, his expression shifting to something more guarded, and moved to the window. It's Patterson, he said, his voice flat, and her husband, and 3 other families from town. Eliza's stomach dropped. A delegation. They were being confronted by a delegation. Should I? No. Nathan's tone was firm. Whatever they've come to say, they'll say it to both of us. You're not hiding in the kitchen like you've done something wrong. He was already moving toward the front door, his entire bearing changing into something harder, more protective. Eliza followed, her heart hammering, wondering what new accusation or judgment had brought half the town to their doorstep. The group waiting in the yard looked grim and determined, Mrs. Patterson at their center like a general leading troops. Her husband stood beside her looking uncomfortable, while the other families, the Chens, the Johnsons, and the Petersons, arranged themselves in what could only be called a confrontational formation. Hail! Mr. Patterson spoke first, his voice formal. We need to talk to you about your household situation. My household is none of your concern, Nathan said coldly. I believe I made that clear the last time your wife decided to involve herself in my private business. It becomes our concern when it affects the community. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her face pinched with righteous conviction. That woman living in your house, unmarried, unchaperoned except for a child, it's unseemly. It sets a bad example. Miss Moore is my employee. She's more than that, and everyone knows it. Mrs. Patterson's voice rose, carrying across the yard. The way you look at her, the way you defend her, the way you presented her as family in town. You're conducting yourself inappropriately, and it's a scandal. Eliza felt heat flood her face, shame and anger warring for dominance. She'd known this was coming, had known that Nathan's public declaration and their growing closeness would eventually provoke this kind of response. But knowing it intellectually and facing it directly were different things. What Eliza and I are or aren't to each other is our business, Nathan said, his voice dangerously quiet. Not yours. It becomes our business when you're setting an immoral example for the entire community. Mrs. Patterson was warming to her subject now, her voice gaining strength. Children see how you two behave. Young people see that you're flouting convention and propriety. What kind of message does that send? The message that people can make their own choices about their lives? Nathan's tone was sharp enough to cut. That widowers don't need the town's permission to find happiness again? That a woman who's been unjustly judged deserves a second chance? A second chance we're willing to offer, Mr. Chen spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. Eliza looked at him in surprise, having expected him to side with Mrs. Patterson. But only under proper conditions. You need to marry her, Hale. Make it legitimate. Give that woman a respectable position in this community and your daughter a proper mother. The statement hung in the air, stunning in its directness. They weren't here to run Eliza off. They were here to force a proposal. You're trying to dictate how I run my life? Nathan's voice was incredulous. Trying to force me into marriage by threatening what exactly? Social ostracism? I've never cared what this town thinks, and I'm not starting now. Think of Lucy, Mrs. Johnson said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was gentler than Mrs. Patterson's, almost pleading. That child deserves stability. She deserves to know that Miss Moore isn't going to disappear one day when she decides to move on to another position. She deserves the security of having a real mother, legally and permanently. Lucy has everything she needs, Nathan shot back. Does she? Mrs. Patterson's smile was sharp. Or does she have an employee who could leave at any time, a father who's so besotted he's not thinking clearly, and a household that exists in a moral gray area? Is that what you want for your daughter? Is that the legacy Sarah would have wanted? The mention of his dead wife was a low blow, and everyone knew it. Nathan's face went white, then red with fury. Don't you dare speak about my wife. Don't you dare use her memory to justify your small-minded judgment. We're not judging, Mr. Chen interjected quickly, shooting Mrs. Patterson a quelling look. We're trying to help. Miss Moore has proven herself to be a good woman, a capable woman. My wife and I have reconsidered our initial reservations about her past. We believe she was wrongly accused, and we want to see her accepted fully into this community. But that can only happen if you give her a respectable position. Marry her, Hale. Make her your wife instead of just your cook. Give her and Lucy the security they both deserve. Eliza found her voice finally, stepping forward despite the trembling in her legs. I don't need anyone to force Mr. Hale into marrying me. I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my life and my future. Are you? Mrs. Patterson turned her sharp gaze on Eliza. Because from where I stand, you're living in a situation that damages your reputation daily. You're allowing yourself to be compromised by a man who clearly has feelings for you, but won't commit to honoring those feelings properly. That's not strength, Miss Moore. That's foolishness. What's foolish is thinking you have any right to dictate how two grown adults conduct their relationship. Eliza's voice was steady now, anger burning away fear. I appreciate that some of you, she nodded toward the Chens and Johnsons, are coming from a place of genuine concern, but the solution to that concern isn't forcing a marriage neither of us has discussed or decided upon. That's not how relationships work. That's not how respect works. So you admit there is a relationship, Mrs. Patterson pounced on the word, an inappropriate relationship that needs to be legitimized. What I admit is that I care about Nathan and Lucy. What I won't admit is that caring for someone requires me to marry them just to satisfy your sense of propriety. Eliza drew herself up to her full height, finding courage she hadn't known she possessed. I've spent 2 years being judged by people who didn't know me, who decided who I was based on accusations rather than evidence. I'm done letting other people's opinions dictate my choices. If and when Nathan and I decide to marry, it will be because we choose to, not because a group of neighbors showed up demanding it. The silence that followed was profound. Even Mrs. Patterson seemed momentarily at a loss for words, her mouth opening and closing without sound. It was Mr. Peterson who finally spoke, his weathered face creasing in what might have been respect. That's fair enough, he said quietly. Can't argue with a woman who knows her own mind. He looked at Nathan. Your business is your business, Hale. We just wanted to make sure everyone's being treated right, that's all. Eliza is being treated with the respect and care she deserves, Nathan said firmly. But I appreciate your concern. Now, if you'll excuse us, my daughter is recovering from an injury and needs our attention. It was a clear dismissal, and most of the group began moving toward their wagons, the confrontation deflating now that both Nathan and Eliza had held their ground. But Mrs. Patterson wasn't finished yet. This isn't over, she said, her voice low and bitter. People are watching. People are talking. You may not care about propriety now, but when Lucy is older and trying to find her place in society, when she's judged by the choices her father made, you'll regret not listening to reason. What I'll regret, Nathan said coldly, is wasting another minute of my life listening to someone who mistakes cruelty for righteousness. Good day, Mrs. Patterson. He turned his back on her, the ultimate insult in a community where courtesy was currency, and walked back toward the house, his hand finding Eliza's and pulling her with him. She went, her heart still racing, not looking back at the faces watching their joined hands with varying expressions of shock and satisfaction. The door closed behind them with a definitive click, shutting out the delegation and their demands. In the sudden quiet of the house, Eliza could hear Lucy stirring on the sofa, waking from her nap. Papa, Miss Eliza, why were people yelling? Nathan released Eliza's hand and went to his daughter, kneeling beside the sofa. Just some neighbors who thought they knew what was best for us. Nothing to worry about. Were they being mean to Miss Eliza again? Lucy's face scrunched with indignation. Because if they were, I'm going to tell them that's not nice, and they should apologize. My fierce defender, Nathan said fondly, smoothing her hair. But no, you don't need to fight this battle. Miss Eliza handled herself beautifully. Lucy looked past her father to where Eliza stood near the door, still processing what had just happened. Are you okay, Miss Eliza? Yes, sweetheart, I'm fine. You don't look fine. You look like you want to cry. The observation was too accurate. Eliza did want to cry, from anger, from relief, from the overwhelming emotion of having Nathan publicly claim her hand, of standing up to judgment, of realizing that the life she'd been building here was more fragile than she'd allowed herself to believe. Sometimes grown-ups need a minute to feel their feelings, Nathan said gently. Why don't you work on that drawing you started yesterday? I need to talk to Miss Eliza for a moment. Lucy nodded, accepting this with the resilience of children who were used to adult complications. She reached for her slate and chalk, already absorbed in creating whatever elaborate scene her imagination had conjured. Nathan stood and moved back to Eliza, his face troubled. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated they'd try something like this. Should have been more careful about how we— No! Eliza cut him off, her voice fierce. Don't apologize for caring about me. Don't apologize for defending me or for holding my hand or for making me feel like I matter. Those people had no right to demand anything from us. They weren't entirely wrong, though. Nathan's voice was quiet, his eyes searching her face. About Lucy deserving stability. About you deserving a respectable position instead of existing in this limbo where you're more than an employee but less than what you should be. Eliza's breath caught. What should I be? Nathan reached out and cupped her face in his hands, the gesture tender and possessive simultaneously. My wife. My partner. Lucy's mother. Not because the town demands it, not to satisfy their sense of propriety, but because it's what I want. What I've wanted since that night we kept vigil over Lucy, maybe even before that. I want you permanently, Eliza. Legally. Completely. Nathan, her voice shook. We've only known each other a few months. People don't— Don't what? Don't fall in love that quickly? His thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch gentle despite the intensity in his voice. Maybe most people don't. But we're not most people. We're two people who've both learned that life is short and uncertain, that tomorrow isn't guaranteed, that waiting for the perfect moment means missing the real ones. He paused, then said simply, I love you, Eliza Moore. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you love my daughter. I love how you make this house feel warm. I love that you stand up to small-minded gossips and don't apologize for taking up space in the world. I love all of it, all of you, and I want to spend whatever time I have left making sure you know it. Tears were streaming down Eliza's face now, her carefully constructed walls crumbling under the weight of his honesty. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm so scared of staying, of believing this is real, of letting myself depend on someone again. I know. I'm scared too. Nathan's voice was rough with emotion. Terrified, actually. Of losing you, of not being enough, of all the ways this could go wrong. But I'm more scared of not trying, of letting fear win, of waking up a year from now and realizing I let the best thing in my life walk away because I was too afraid to fight for it. I don't want to walk away, Eliza admitted. I want to stay so badly it hurts. But I don't know how to believe in permanence anymore. I don't know how to trust that this won't be taken away. Then we'll learn together. Nathan's forehead came to rest against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. We'll take it one day at a time, one moment at a time. We'll build something strong enough to weather whatever comes. But we'll do it together, as partners, as equals. Not because anyone is forcing us to, but because we choose to. Is this a proposal? Eliza asked, half laughing through her tears. Would you like it to be? She pulled back enough to see his face, to read the vulnerability and hope written there in equal measure. This man who'd lost so much and still found the courage to risk loving again. This man who'd defended her to an entire community, who'd given her sanctuary and respect in something she'd stopped believing existed, a place to belong. Yes, she said, the word coming out strong and sure despite her shaking. Yes, I would like it to be a proposal. And yes, I would like to accept it. Not because Mrs. Patterson thinks we should, not to give Lucy security, though I want that too. But because I love you, I love both of you. And I'm tired of running from the only thing that's ever felt like home. Nathan's face transformed, joy breaking through the careful control he usually maintained. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a fierceness that spoke of relief and possession and profound gratitude. Say it again, he murmured against her hair. Please, I need to hear it again. I love you. The words came easier this time, less frightening now that they were out in the open. I love you, Nathan Hale. I love your quiet strength and your dedication to Lucy, and the way you make me feel safe and seen. I love how you've given me room to be afraid while never letting me use that fear as an excuse to run. I love— Are you kissing now? Lucy's voice cut through the moment, delighted and triumphant. Because I've been listening, and it sounds like you should definitely be kissing now. They pulled apart, both laughing despite the intensity of the moment, to find Lucy propped up on her elbows, her slate forgotten, watching them with unabashed satisfaction. How long have you been listening? Nathan asked, though his smile suggested he wasn't particularly upset about being overheard. Since you said you loved Miss Eliza, which was very good, Papa. I've been waiting for you to say that for weeks. She turned her attention to Eliza. And you love us too, which I already knew, but it's nice to hear you say it. So now you're getting married, right? That's what people do when they love each other? Yes, Nathan said, his eyes never leaving Eliza's face. That's exactly what people do when they love each other, if Miss Eliza says yes. I already said yes, Eliza pointed out. Then say it again, officially, with Lucy as witness. Eliza turned to face them both. This man and this child who'd become her entire world without her quite realizing when it had happened. Yes, she said clearly. I'll marry you, Nathan Hale. I'll be Lucy's mother and your wife and whatever else this family needs me to be. Yes. Lucy let out a whoop of joy that seemed too large for her small body, bouncing on the sofa despite her injured leg. I knew it! I knew from the first day you came that you were supposed to be my mama. I picked you, and I was right. You certainly were, Nathan agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He crossed to the sofa and scooped his daughter up carefully, mindful of her healing leg, then carried her back to where Eliza stood. What do you think, Lucy girl? Should we seal this properly? Yes. Kiss her, Papa. That's what people do when they get engaged. Nathan looked at Eliza, asking permission with his eyes. She nodded, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. And then his lips were on hers, gentle and sure and full of promise. It was their first kiss, witnessed by a 6-year-old with a talent for matchmaking, and it felt exactly right. Not dramatic or desperate, but steady and certain, a foundation being laid for everything that would come after. When they pulled apart, Lucy was beaming between them, her small hands reaching out to pull them both closer. We're a family now, she announced with absolute certainty. A real family. Papa, Miss Eliza, and me. We've been a family for a while now, Eliza said softly. This just makes it official. Good. Lucy settled her head against her father's shoulder, one hand still gripping Eliza's. I was getting tired of waiting for you two to figure it out. It's been very exhausting being patient. Nathan laughed, the sound lighter than Eliza had ever heard from him. Well, you won't have to be patient anymore. We'll set a date, make it legal, and then Miss Eliza will be stuck with us forever. Not stuck, Eliza corrected gently. Choosing, every day, choosing to stay. That's different. It is, Nathan agreed, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made promises without words. Thank you for choosing us, for being brave enough to stay. The moment was broken by the sound of horses again. The ranch hands returning for lunch, their timing impeccable as always. Nathan set Lucy back on the sofa with a promise to tell her everything later, and Eliza moved automatically toward the kitchen, already mentally cataloging what she needed to prepare. But Nathan caught her hand before she could go, pulling her back for one more quick kiss. I love you, he said quietly, just for her. In case I don't say it enough in the future, I love you now, and I'll love you tomorrow and every day after that." "I love you too," Eliza whispered back. "Even when I'm scared, even when it doesn't make sense. I love you." The ranch hands filed in, loud and hungry and full of stories about their morning's work, and life resumed its normal rhythm. But everything was different now, transformed by declarations made and accepted, by choices that couldn't be taken back. Eliza moved through the familiar motions of serving lunch, but she felt lighter, freer, as if a weight she hadn't known she was carrying had finally been lifted. Collins caught her eye as she refilled his coffee and gave her a knowing smile. "Congratulations, Miss Moore, or should I start calling you Mrs. Hale now?" The other men looked up sharply, understanding dawning on their faces. Nathan cleared his throat, his hand finding Eliza's where it rested on the table. "Miss Moore has agreed to marry me," he announced, his voice carrying quiet pride. "We haven't set a date yet, but when we do, you're all invited. We'll have a proper celebration." The men's faces split into genuine smiles, their approval clear. They offered congratulations, made good-natured jokes about Nathan finally getting smart enough to lock down the best cook in 3 counties, and generally filled the kitchen with warmth and acceptance. Watching them, feeling Nathan's hand in hers and Lucy's joy radiating from the sofa, Eliza felt something settle deep in her chest. Not quite peace, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first tentative belief that maybe, just maybe, this could work. That she could build a life here, could trust these people with her heart, could finally stop running and start living. It wouldn't be easy, she knew that. There would be more judgment from town, more challenges to face, more moments of fear and doubt. But looking around this kitchen, at the man who loved her despite her past, at the child who'd claimed her as family from the first day, at the rough-hewn men who'd accepted her without question, Eliza thought maybe she was finally strong enough to face whatever came. She'd spent 2 years learning how to leave. Now it was time to learn how to stay. And for the first time since that terrible day in Boston when her world had fallen apart, Eliza felt something that had been absent for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like. Hope. Real, solid, terrifying hope that tomorrow might be better than today, that the future might hold joy instead of just survival, that the risk of loving might be worth the reward. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked quietly, beneath the chatter of the ranch hands. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, seeing not just the widower or the rancher or the father, but the man who'd chosen her as surely as she'd chosen him. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Finally." His smile was worth every moment of fear, every mile she'd traveled, every night she'd spent wondering if she'd ever find a place to call home. "So am I," he said simply. "So am I." The week following their engagement passed in a blur of quiet joy and practical planning. Nathan wanted to marry quickly. "No point waiting when we're both certain," he said, and Eliza found she agreed. They'd already wasted enough time dancing around their feelings, pretending they could maintain professional distance when their hearts had made the decision weeks ago. They set the date for 3 weeks hence, enough time to make basic preparations, but not so long that doubt could creep in and take root. Lucy threw herself into wedding planning with the enthusiasm only a 6-year-old could muster, drawing elaborate pictures of what Eliza should wear and insisting they needed flowers everywhere, even though November in Montana meant most flowers had long since surrendered to frost. "We'll make it work," Eliza promised, watching Lucy sketch yet another dress design with her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "Maybe dried flowers or pine branches with berries, something that fits the season." "As long as you look like a princess," Lucy said seriously. "Brides are supposed to look like princesses. It's a rule." "Where did you hear that rule?" "I made it up, but it's still true." Nathan, watching from the doorway with his coffee cup halfway to his lips, laughed, a sound that was becoming more common in the house, filling spaces that had been silent too long. "I think Miss Eliza will look beautiful no matter what she wears," he said, his eyes warm on Eliza's face. "Though I agree with Lucy about the princess part." "You're both ridiculous," Eliza said, but she was smiling, feeling the warmth of their affection like sunlight after a long winter. This was what family felt like, she realized. Not perfection or constant harmony, but this easy comfort, this sense of being seen and valued, this knowledge that she could be herself, flaws and fears and all, and still be loved. The news of their engagement spread through Dry Creek faster than wildfire. Some people responded with genuine happiness. The Chens sent a warm note of congratulations, and several other families who'd been part of that uncomfortable delegation made gestures of welcome and acceptance. But others, led predictably by Mrs. Patterson, responded with thinly veiled hostility, suggesting Eliza had trapped Nathan into marriage, that she was using Lucy to secure her position, that the whole situation was unseemly and rushed. "Let them talk," Nathan said when Eliza expressed concern about the gossip. "They talked before, they'll talk now. They'll talk 20 years from now when we're old and gray and still together. Their opinions don't change what's real between us." But on a cold Tuesday morning, 10 days before the wedding, Mrs. Patterson's talk manifested into something more dangerous than words. Eliza had gone to town alone to collect fabric for her wedding dress. Nothing fancy, just a simple blue wool that would be practical for everyday wear afterward, when she found herself cornered in the general store by a group of women led by the indomitable Mrs. Patterson herself. "Miss Moore." Mrs. Patterson's voice was syrupy sweet, which immediately put Eliza on guard. Or should I say, almost Mrs. Hale. "We heard about your upcoming nuptials. How fortunate for you, landing such a respectable position after your difficulties back east." Eliza felt her spine stiffen, recognizing the trap being laid. "If you have something to say, Mrs. Patterson, please say it directly. I don't have time for games." "Games?" Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened in mock innocence. "I'm simply concerned, as any caring member of this community would be. After all, Mr. Hale is marrying you without knowing the full truth of what happened in Boston, isn't he? Without understanding the real reason you left?" The other women shifted uncomfortably, some looking genuinely curious, others seeming to wish they were anywhere else. Eliza forced herself to remain calm, though her heart was racing. "Nathan knows everything he needs to know about my past." "Does he? Does he know that you weren't just accused of theft, but that the family you worked for found you in the mistress's bedroom at midnight, going through her jewelry box? That you claimed you were simply returning a borrowed brooch, but no one could verify your story? That the only reason you weren't convicted was because the family chose not to press charges fully, wanting to avoid scandal?" The words hit Eliza like physical blows, each one a twist of the truth designed to paint her in the worst possible light. Yes, she'd been in Mrs. Ashford's room late at night. Yes, she'd been near the jewelry box. But she'd been returning a brooch Mrs. Ashford had lent her weeks earlier for a formal dinner, returning it only when she'd finally located it in her room where it had fallen behind a drawer. The timing had been terrible, her explanation weak-sounding even to her own ears, and when jewelry went missing the next day, she'd been the obvious suspect. "That's not," Eliza started, but Mrs. Patterson cut her off. "I've corresponded with people in Boston, you see, made inquiries. It's amazing what you can learn when you ask the right questions. And what I learned is that you're not the innocent victim you've portrayed yourself as. You're a woman who was caught red-handed and barely escaped prosecution, who's been moving from town to town one step ahead of her reputation, and who's now managed to ensnare a lonely widower by playing on his daughter's affections." "That's enough." Eliza's voice was sharp, cutting through Mrs. Patterson's tirade. "You've twisted the facts to suit your narrative, as you've done from the beginning, but the truth is simple. I was accused, I was tried, I was acquitted. Everything else is speculation and malice." "Is it?" Mrs. Patterson smiled, triumphant. "Then why don't we ask Mr. Hale what he thinks when he hears the full story, when he learns exactly what kind of woman he's bringing into his home as a mother to his precious daughter?" "He already knows." The voice came from behind Eliza, deep and cold with fury. Nathan stood in the doorway of the general store, his face carved from granite, his eyes blazing with an anger Eliza had never seen from him. "He knows because Eliza told me everything the first week she was here. Every detail, every accusation, every moment of that nightmare. She's been honest with me from the start, which is more than I can say for you, Mrs. Patterson." The store had gone deadly silent. Even Mr. Jenkins had stopped his inventory work to watch the confrontation unfold. Mrs. Patterson's face had paled, her confident posture faltering. I was simply trying to ensure you had all the information. You were trying to destroy a good woman's reputation because she dared to find happiness you don't think she deserves. Nathan moved to stand beside Eliza, his presence solid and protective. You've made it your mission to punish her for crimes she didn't commit, to poison this community against her, to use twisted versions of truth to justify your own cruelty. I'm done being polite about it. Mr. Hale, I understand you're defensive of your fiancée, but she's not my fiancée. She's my family. Nathan's voice was flat, implacable. And you've just slandered a member of my family in public, using information you obtained through what I can only assume was malicious correspondence designed to dig up dirt. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, Mrs. Patterson. And frankly, I find it lacking. Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red with humiliation and rage. You'll regret this, both of you. When people learn the truth about her past, when they understand what you're bringing into your home, then let them learn. Nathan's voice rose, carrying to every corner of the store and likely beyond. Let them know that Eliza Moore was falsely accused by people who needed someone to blame for their own carelessness. Let them know she endured a trial that found her innocent. Let them know she's worked honestly in 4 towns since then, leaving each one not because she was run off, but because people like you made it impossible for her to stay. Let them know all of it, and then let them judge who's really in the wrong here. He turned to address the entire store, his voice ringing with conviction. Eliza Moore is the strongest, most courageous woman I've ever known. She could have stayed silent about her past, could have hidden it, and hoped I never found out. Instead, she told me everything, gave me all the reasons I might choose not to trust her, and let me make my own decision. That's integrity. That's honesty. That's the kind of character I want my daughter to learn from. Eliza felt tears burning behind her eyes, overwhelmed by his defense, by the public declaration that left no room for doubt about where his loyalty lay. But Nathan wasn't finished. So here's what's going to happen, he continued, his gaze sweeping across the watching faces. Eliza and I are getting married next week. Anyone who wants to attend and celebrate with us is welcome. Anyone who wants to continue judging her based on lies and rumors can stay away. But either way, she's going to be my wife, Lucy's mother, and a permanent member of this community. And anyone who can't accept that can answer to me. The silence that followed was profound. Mrs. Patterson looked like she wanted to argue further but couldn't find the words. The other women had retreated slightly, distancing themselves from her now that Nathan had made his position so unmistakably clear. Even Mr. Jenkins was nodding slowly, his weathered face approving. Finally, Mrs. Chen stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the fabric section. You have my support, she said quietly, looking at Eliza. Both of you. My husband and I will be honored to attend your wedding. She turned to Mrs. Patterson, her usually gentle face stern. And I think you owe Miss Moore an apology for spreading malicious gossip. I will not. Then you should leave. Mrs. Chen's voice was firm. I may not own this store, but I spend enough money here to have an opinion about who's welcome in it, and right now, I don't think you are. Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened and closed several times, her face cycling through shades of red that might have been comical under other circumstances. Finally, she gathered her skirts and swept from the store with as much dignity as she could muster, which wasn't much given the circumstances. The tension broke immediately, several people exhaling in relief, others beginning to murmur among themselves. Mrs. Johnson approached Eliza tentatively, her face kind. I'm sorry you've had to endure this, she said softly. Some people can't seem to understand that past mistakes, real or imagined, don't define a person forever. You've shown nothing but kindness and capability since arriving here. That should be what matters. Thank you, Eliza managed, her voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. Other women came forward then, offering their own words of support, or at least acceptance. Not everyone. Some still looked uncertain, still swayed by Mrs. Patterson's poison, but enough that Eliza felt something shift in the atmosphere of the store, in the town itself. Nathan's public defense had forced people to choose sides, and more of them were choosing hers than she'd expected. When they finally left the store, Nathan's hand firmly clasped around hers, Eliza felt exhausted, but also strangely lighter. The worst had happened. Her past had been dragged into the light in the most public, humiliating way possible, and she'd survived it. More than survived it. She'd been defended, supported, claimed so thoroughly that no one could doubt where she stood. "Thank you," she said once they were alone in the wagon, heading back toward the ranch, "for what you said in there, for defending me." "I wasn't defending you." Nathan's voice was rough. "I was stating facts. Everything I said was true. You are strong and courageous and honest. You're exactly the kind of person I want Lucy learning from. And if anyone in that town has a problem with you, they'll have to go through me first. You made an enemy of Mrs. Patterson. She won't forget this." "Good. I've been too polite to her for too long. Someone needed to stand up to her bullying, and I'm glad it was me." He glanced at Eliza, his expression softening. "Besides, you're worth making enemies for. You're worth fighting for. I need you to understand that." "I'm starting to," Eliza admitted. "For the first time in 2 years, I'm starting to believe that maybe I deserve defending. That maybe I'm not the villain in this story after all." "You were never the villain. You were just the convenient scapegoat for people too cowardly to admit their own failings." Nathan pulled the wagon to a stop just before they reached the ranch, turning to face her fully. "Listen to me, Eliza. I don't care what happened in Boston. I don't care what anyone says about your past. All I care about is who you are now, who you've been since the day you arrived at my ranch. And that person is remarkable. That person is someone I'm proud to love, proud to marry, proud to build a life with." Eliza leaned into him, letting his strength support her weight for a moment. "I love you," she whispered. "Even when I'm scared, even when I think I don't deserve this happiness, I love you." "You deserve everything good this world has to offer," Nathan said firmly, "and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." They sat like that for a long moment, the Montana sky vast above them, the ranch waiting ahead. Then Nathan clicked to the horses and they moved forward, toward home, toward the life they were building together despite all the obstacles thrown in their path. Lucy was waiting on the porch when they arrived, having been left in the care of Collins while they went to town. She took one look at their faces, and her expression shifted from excitement to concern. "What happened? Did Mrs. Patterson say mean things again?" "She tried," Nathan said, lifting his daughter down from the porch. "But it didn't work. Miss Eliza has too many people on her side now." "Good." Lucy's face was fierce, protective in a way that reminded Eliza so much of Nathan it made her chest tight. "I don't like Mrs. Patterson. She has a mean face." "Lucy," Nathan started, but Eliza cut him off with a laugh. "It's all right. She does have a mean face. But more importantly, she has a mean heart, and that's what really matters. We don't have to like her, but we can pity her. People who spread that much poison are usually unhappy themselves." "Are you unhappy, Miss Eliza?" Lucy's question was direct, concerned. "Because of what Mrs. Patterson said?" Eliza knelt in front of the girl, taking both her small hands. "You know what? I'm not. I thought I would be. I thought having my past dragged out in public would destroy me. But your father stood up for me. Other people stood up for me. And I realized that the truth is stronger than lies, and love is stronger than hate. So no, sweetheart, I'm not unhappy. I'm actually more certain than ever that I'm exactly where I belong." Lucy threw her arms around Eliza's neck, squeezing tight. "I'm so glad. Because I need you to be my mama, and mamas can't be unhappy on their wedding day. It's not allowed." "Well, then I'll make sure to be extremely happy," Eliza promised, holding the girl close and breathing in the scent of her hair, sunshine and innocence and the particular sweetness of childhood. The days leading up to the wedding passed quickly, filled with preparations that felt more significant than their simplicity suggested. Eliza sewed her dress by lamplight after Lucy went to bed, her stitches small and even, her mind quiet for perhaps the first time since leaving Boston. Nathan built a new shelf in what would become their shared bedroom, his hammer strikes rhythmic and sure. And Lucy made decorations from dried flowers and pine branches, her imagination transforming humble materials into something beautiful. The ranch hands pitched in too, cleaning the barn for the celebration, building extra tables, generally making themselves useful in the gruff, practical way of men who weren't comfortable with sentiment but understood its importance. Collins pulled Eliza aside one afternoon and pressed a small wooden box into her hands. "Made this for you," he said, looking embarrassed. "For your wedding. It's not much, just a little jewelry box. Figured every woman should have a place to keep her treasures. Eliza opened it to find a beautifully crafted box with a simple clasp, the wood smooth and warm under her fingers. Collins, this is wonderful. Thank you. Least I could do. You saved my life when I took that fall, and you've been feeding us better than we've eaten in years. Seemed right to mark the occasion proper. He shuffled his feet, then added, also, for what it's worth, the boss is happier than I've ever seen him. You're good for him. Good for all of us, really. So thank you for staying. The sentiment, coming from a man of few words, touched Eliza deeply. She thanked him again, her voice thick with emotion, and carried the box to her room where she placed it carefully on the dresser. It was the first wedding gift she'd received, and somehow that made it more precious than anything elaborate could have been. 2 days before the wedding, a package arrived from town with a note from Mrs. Chen. Inside was a beautiful shawl in soft cream wool, delicate and warm, clearly made with skill and care. For your wedding day, the note read. Every bride deserves something special. My husband and I are honored to witness your marriage and to welcome you properly into our community. What Mrs. Patterson did was wrong, and many of us want you to know we don't share her views. Wishing you every happiness. Agatha Chen. Eliza held the shawl against her chest, overwhelmed by the kindness of near strangers who'd chosen to see her as she was, rather than as Mrs. Patterson had painted her. Nathan found her like that, sitting on the edge of their bed with tears streaming down her face. What's wrong? He asked, alarmed. Nothing's wrong. She showed him the shawl, the note. Everything's right. I forgot what it felt like to be welcomed, to be wanted, and now I remember, and it's almost too much. Nathan sat beside her, pulling her close. Get used to it. You're going to be wanted and welcomed every day for the rest of your life. That's what family does. That's what love means. The wedding day arrived cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to promise good things. Eliza woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement, to find Lucy already awake and bouncing on the foot of her bed. It's today! You're getting married today! Can I help you get ready? Can I do your hair? Are you nervous? Because Papa is nervous. I heard him pacing in his room super early this morning. He was probably just excited, Eliza said, laughing at Lucy's enthusiasm. And yes, you can absolutely help me get ready. We'll make a whole day of it. They did exactly that, turning the preparation into a celebration in itself. Lucy brushed Eliza's hair until it shone, then helped weave it into a simple style with small dried flowers tucked throughout. Eliza dressed in her blue wool dress, the cut simple but flattering, practical enough for everyday wear, but special enough for a wedding. Mrs. Chen's shawl completed the outfit, adding elegance without pretension. You look beautiful, Lucy breathed, her eyes wide. Like a real princess. Papa's going to forget how to talk when he sees you. I hope not. We need him to say his vows. Oh, he'll remember those. He's been practicing them every night. I heard him through the wall. He wants to get it perfect because you deserve perfect. Eliza's eyes burned with fresh tears. She'd cried more in the past 2 weeks than in the past 2 years, but these were good tears, happy tears, tears that came from being overwhelmed by love rather than grief. The ceremony was set for noon to be held in the ranch's large barn, which had been transformed by the efforts of everyone who cared about them. Pine branches and dried flowers decorated every available surface, and someone, probably Collins, had built a simple arch that framed the space where they'd exchange vows. Chairs borrowed from various sources lined up in rows, enough seating for the 30 or so people who'd confirmed they'd attend. As Eliza walked toward the barn with Lucy holding her hand, she felt her heart racing. This was it. The moment where everything changed permanently, where she stopped being Eliza Moore, woman without a home, without a place, without belonging, and became Eliza Hale, wife and mother and permanent member of this community. The barn fell silent as she entered, all eyes turning toward her. Nathan stood at the front beneath the arch, and the look on his face when he saw her made every moment of fear and doubt worth it. His eyes went wide, his breath catching visibly, and when she reached him and took his hands, she could feel them trembling. You're beautiful, he whispered, just for her. Absolutely beautiful. So are you, she whispered back, and it was true. He'd dressed in his best suit, had shaved carefully, looked younger and happier than she'd ever seen him. The The ceremony itself was simple, conducted by Mr. Peterson, who served as the occasional minister for the community. The words were traditional, the promises ancient and binding. But when it came time for them to speak their personal vows, Nathan's voice carried clear and strong. Eliza, when you arrived at my ranch, I thought I was hiring a cook, someone temporary to fill a practical need. I had no idea I was welcoming home the missing piece of my family, the person who would teach me how to live again instead of just survive. You've brought light back to this house, laughter back to my daughter's life, and hope back to my heart. I promise to honor you, protect you, stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to build a life with you where you always know you're wanted, you're valued, you're home. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life, and to make sure you never doubt that you made the right choice in staying. Eliza's vision blurred with tears, but she forced herself to speak clearly when her turn came. Nathan, I came to your ranch running from my past, convinced I could never trust or belong again. You gave me sanctuary when I needed it most, but more than that, you gave me a reason to stop running. You and Lucy showed me what family really means. Not perfection or obligation, but choice and commitment and showing up for each other even when it's hard. I promise to be the wife you deserve, the mother Lucy needs, the partner who stands beside you in all things. I promise to choose you every day, even when I'm scared, even when it would be easier to run. I promise to build a home with you where love is stronger than fear and where belonging is something we create together, one day at a time. There wasn't a dry eye in the barn by the time they finished. Even the ranch hands were suspiciously bright-eyed, though they'd never admit to crying. Mr. Peterson pronounced them husband and wife with evident satisfaction, and when Nathan kissed her, thoroughly, possessively, tenderly, the barn erupted in cheers and applause. Lucy launched herself at them both, wrapping her arms around their legs. You're married! You're really married! I have a mama now! Eliza scooped the girl up, holding her between herself and Nathan, the three of them forming a unit that felt complete in a way nothing had before. You do, sweetheart. Forever and always, you have a mama. The celebration that followed was joyful and chaotic, filled with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible given the resources available. People who'd been uncertain about accepting Eliza now came forward to offer genuine congratulations, won over by the obvious love between the bride and groom, by Lucy's uncontainable happiness, by the way the whole ranch seemed to glow with contentment. Mrs. Chen embraced Eliza warmly. Welcome to the community, Mrs. Hale. Properly this time, with no reservations. You're one of us now. Even Mr. Jenkins, the general store owner, approached with an awkward smile. Congratulations. And I wanted to say, what Mrs. Patterson did, spreading those stories, it wasn't right. Most of us see that now. You've proven your character through your actions, and that's what matters. The only notable absence was Mrs. Patterson herself, who'd apparently chosen to boycott the wedding rather than admit she'd been wrong. But her absence was more blessing than loss, allowing everyone else to celebrate without tension or judgment. As evening fell and the celebration began winding down, Nathan pulled Eliza aside to a quiet corner of the barn. The sounds of fiddle music and laughter continued behind them, but in their small bubble, it was just the two of them. How are you feeling, Mrs. Hale? He asked, his arms encircling her waist. Overwhelmed, happy, terrified, grateful, all of it at once. She leaned into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished in a way she'd never expected to feel again. Is this real? Are we really married? Very real, very married, and there's no escape now. But he was smiling, his eyes warm with affection and promise. I don't want to escape. For the first time in my life, I want to stay exactly where I am. Good. Because I fully intend to keep you here. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, tasting of promise and permanence. When they finally pulled apart, he said quietly, Thank you for giving me another chance at this. At family, at partnership, at love. After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I'd used up all my chances at happiness. And then you walked into my kitchen with your carpet bag and your determination to stay invisible, and you changed everything. You changed everything for me too, Eliza admitted. You taught me that staying could be stronger than running, that love could be worth the risk, that home wasn't a place, but the people who chose to keep you. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms while their new life unfolded around them. Lucy eventually found them, dragging them back to the celebration with demands that they dance together, that everyone see how happy they were, that this perfect day be properly documented in the memories of everyone present. Later, much later, after the guests had departed and Lucy had finally fallen asleep, exhausted but wearing a smile even in slumber, Nathan and Eliza stood together on the porch of their house, looking out over the ranch that was now fully, legally theirs together. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, his arm around her shoulders, her body tucked against his side. "I'm thinking about that first day," Eliza said softly. "When I walked up to this house with my single carpet bag, convinced I'd stay for a few months at most before moving on again. I was so determined not to care, not to attach, not to let myself hope for anything beyond a job and a roof over my head. And now I have everything. A husband who loves me, a daughter who chose me, a home that's mine. People in town who've decided I'm worth knowing. A future that stretches out ahead instead of just an endless series of escapes." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with emotion. "You gave me all of that. You and Lucy, you gave me a reason to stop running and start living." "No," Nathan said firmly, cupping her face in his hands. "We gave each other that. I was just existing before you came, going through motions, raising Lucy, but not really living either. You brought warmth back to this house, hope back to our lives. We saved each other, Eliza. That's what makes this work." She knew he was right. This wasn't a fairy tale where one person rescued another. It was something better, more real. Two broken people finding each other and choosing to build something whole together. Two people who'd lost everything learning to trust again. Two people brave enough to believe that love was worth the risk, that staying was worth the fear, that family could be chosen as surely as it was born into. "I love you," she whispered, the words coming easier each time she said them. "I love you and Lucy and this life we're building. I love that I get to wake up here every morning. I love that this is home." "I love you too," Nathan replied. "More than I thought possible. More than I knew how to say until you taught me how." They stood together in the darkness, the stars blazing overhead in the clear Montana sky, the ranch quiet around them. Inside the house, Lucy slept in her bed, secure in the knowledge that she had both her parents under one roof, that her family was complete. In the barn, the decorations still hung from the celebration, evidence of a community that had chosen to embrace rather than exclude, to welcome rather than judge. And on the porch, Nathan and Eliza held each other close and looked toward a future that finally felt certain. There would still be challenges. There always were. There would be harsh winters and difficult seasons, gossip that persisted despite evidence to the contrary, moments of doubt and fear that would need to be faced together. But they would face it all as partners, as husband and wife, as the family they'd chosen to become. Eliza Moore had arrived at the Hale Ranch believing she was there to cook. She'd thought her job was temporary, her stay brief, her impact minimal. She'd been wrong about everything. She hadn't come to work. She'd come home. She hadn't come to cook for a family. She'd come to become part of one. And Lucy had known it from the very first day, had seen what the adults were too afraid to acknowledge, that sometimes families weren't born, they were built, that sometimes mothers weren't assigned, they were chosen, that sometimes love didn't follow the expected path, but found its way anyway, persistent and true. "Come inside," Nathan said finally, his voice rough with emotion and promise. "It's cold out here, and we have a whole lifetime ahead of us to stand on this porch and count our blessings." "A whole lifetime," Eliza agreed, letting him lead her inside to the warmth of the house, to the life they would build together day by day, moment by moment, choice by choice. She'd come to Dry Creek to disappear. Instead, she'd been found. She'd come to the Hale Ranch to survive. Instead, she'd learned to live. She'd come expecting to leave eventually, as she always had. Instead, she'd discovered what it meant to stay. And in staying, in choosing this man, and this child, and this life, over the safety of perpetual motion, Eliza had found something she'd stopped believing existed. Home. Not the house, though she loved every board and beam of it. Not the ranch, though she'd come to appreciate its harsh beauty. But home in the truest sense. The place where she was known and wanted and loved, where she could be fully herself without apology or explanation, where belonging was something she'd earned not through perfection, but through showing up, day after day, choosing to stay even when leaving would have been easier. The house was warm when they entered, the fire banked but still glowing, ready to be brought back to life. Lucy's drawings covered the walls, evidence of a childhood happening in real time. The kitchen smelled faintly of the bread Eliza had baked that morning, of coffee and cinnamon and the accumulated scents of daily living. It smelled like home. Nathan closed the door behind them, shutting out the cold night and sealing them inside their small sanctuary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new moments of joy and difficulty both. But tonight they had this quiet celebration of promises kept and futures secured, of a family that had chosen itself against all odds. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hale," Nathan whispered, pulling her close one more time. Eliza smiled against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, feeling Lucy sleeping peacefully down the hall, feeling the house wrap around them like an embrace. "Thank you," she whispered back, "for giving me one." And in that moment, with her husband's arms around her and her daughter safe in bed and the ranch quiet under a blanket of stars, Eliza finally understood what she'd been searching for all along. Not escape from judgment, not distance from pain, not constant motion to outrun her past. Just this simple, extraordinary gift of belonging, of being chosen, of choosing, in return, to stay. She'd thought Nathan hired her to cook. Instead, Lucy had picked her to be her mother. And somewhere between arriving with her single carpet bag and standing in her wedding dress, between running from her past and building toward her future, between being Eliza Moore and becoming Eliza Hale, she'd learned the most important lesson of all. Home wasn't something you found. It was something you built, one day at a time, with people brave enough to risk loving you and strong enough to let you love them back. And she was finally home.